Wana transmisja. So we, excuse me, let's just wait a little bit. So they are just preparing technical connection for broadcasting. So it takes just a while. It takes a while. So we have enough time today. So. Okay, so I just get a message that we can start. We are broadcasted, so we are publicly viewed, and they are. This debate is broadcasted to potentially over 1 million people in internet on the different YouTubes, but practically we have. Potentially 30 to 60,000 viewers in internet, not only in Poland but in Hungary, Netherlands, Sweden, Lithuania, and other countries. So from month to month we have more and more participants. So this debate is in line with the conference on future of Europe. The Institute of Schuman thought joined that initiative of the European Parliament, and we are organizers of that debates monthly. Each month we have one debate, and up to the December. There are many topics covered in that debate, which are most important for different, most important for European Union nowadays. We call that debate Schuman's debate on renewing the European Union. So there are topics which are considered in that conference on the future of Europe. What have to be changed, what have to be adjusted so that the European Union is working more efficiently. And today we are going to face some certain, ideas of President Emmanuel Macron on the future of Europe, the ideas of people or leaders in Germany, and ideas of other countries. And we would like, face that from the perspective of Europe presented and according the idea of Robert Schuman. So because this is the initial point after the Second War, the Robert Schuman, Alcide de Gasperi, and Konrad Adenauer, great free person, initiated, the building of the Community of European Nations. And we have a duty, to refer that what is now happening. We have a duty to refer to that what was initially, and the question how far we went from that direction, or should we adjust something to come back to that idea. And the co-organizers of this debate is an economic forum, a very big organization, international organization, and as well the Ordo Iuris. And there are many medias, who are supporting our efforts. And I am very happy today to have a very important person from different countries. And let me just, on the beginning, to welcome Mr. Yves Garnier, who is a president of the Parti Fédéraliste Européen from France. So welcome, Mr. Garnier. Then welcome Professor Peter Herman, who is a human rights center, who is from a human rights center at the CSU. Then we have Excellency Dr. Ewa Salkiewicz, former ambassador at the Holy See, and Professor de la Fuente from Spain, Jan Czarniecki, a diplomat, and Professor David Reichard from Comenius University in Bratislava. And we expected to come as well Professor Grosse. I'm not sure if he is present, and as well welcome Adrian Stadnicki, Director of Regional Center of East Europe, cooperating with a German organization of a business. So I think I welcomed everybody. So I'm checking if there is somebody missed on that initial welcome introduction. So yes, it seems to be that I excuse me, of course, very important person from Lithuania, Dr. Egidius Verakis. So, Dr. Egidius, welcome. Very great you are here with us. So let's start, our debate. So I just send you the certain questions. I send you the certain questions which are the base for our today debate, and let me just remind this this debate and the topic. So how much President Macron's doctrine for Renew Europe ties back to the concept of Schuman's Community of European Nations. And we have around 13 questions. Of course, it's up to you to which questions you are going to refer and to extend your point of view. So some 5 initial questions are on that screen. So, for instance, did France, Germany, and Italy give up the way to Community of European Nations, tracked by Robert Schuman, Alcide de Gasperi, and Konrad Adenauer? So this is the question, yes, because, the France, Germany, and Italy, this, leaders from these countries, they were, leading us to the Community of European Nation after the Second War. So therefore, the question is that way currently different, or how far we went out from that direction? So the next question is, does Germany direct European Union against the Schumann's and Adenauer concept to superstate? Nowadays, there is many questions, related where we are going to, the superstate. The question is that true that Germany directs us to the superstate, or it's not true? Just let's, hesitate that, to be more comfortable where we are. What in Macron's ideas for future of Europe is compatible with Schumann's Europe? Next question is, which German ideas for future of Europe are compatible with Schumann's Europe? So again, could you deliver evidence that the unity, solidarity, and peace exist within European Union? So there are 5 initial questions. I have more of them. Altogether, they are 13, and we will hesitate all of them later on. So on the very beginning, of course, you decide to which question you refer. And as well, later on, when we'll develop the discussion, I would appreciate if you will join this discussion to extend your point of view related to the next other questions as well. So as a first person, I would, invite to take a floor Mr. Yves Garnier, excuse me for pronunciation, a president of the Parti Federalist European from France. So, Mr. Garnier, be so kind to take your floor, please.
Okay. Good afternoon. And do you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, excellent, excellent. That's great.
Perfect. So good afternoon to everybody, and thank you, Mr. Krysiak, for this invitation. I'm very glad to participate in this debate. So I would like to introduce myself and the EFP, that is the European Federalist Party, the Parti Fédéraliste Européen. This party was created by European citizens in 2014. It was created as a transnational political party. I think it's rather a political experimentation. We wanted to achieve during these elections two major goals. Firstly, to participate in European election in different countries of the EU with the same name, the same logo, and the same program. The program was a federal, we advocate for a federal and democratic Europe and for the defense of the European civilization. Secondly, we wanted at that time have a direct contact with voters to discuss with them about Europe. We wanted to know what did they think, what did they fear, what did they expect from Europe. Finally, it was a good experience, and this network, European Federalist Party, still exists. So let's go back to the subject. And the first question is, did France, Germany, and Italy give up the way to community of European nations? So the European Community of European Nations refer to the idea of the founding fathers of Europe, Robert Schuman, Gasperi, and Adenauer. Personally, I do not think so. In his book, Robert Schuman, the book of Robert Schuman is entitled For Europe. Robert Schuman wrote that he didn't believe in the merge of the member state into a super state, just because that clear that nation states are historical realities that cannot be denied. So actually, nothing at this date, nothing like that has actually happened. The European governments didn't create any supranational state or institution. From the beginning of EU, independent nations worked together in strong cooperation with respect of each other, and at the same time, effectively, they defend their own interests. So today, the European reality is an intergovernmental functioning. The institution, the common market, the custom union, Schengen area, the Eurozone are ruled by treaties and not by constitution. That is very important. So no nation has given up its sovereignty. The treaties are based on the free region of states, which are also free to leave the EU. Effectively, it was the case for the United Kingdom after the vote for Brexit by the British citizens. So
go ahead, Mr.
Okay, so I'm federalist. I'm a real federalist militant, and I still believe in a federal Europe, much rather a confederal Europe. But like Schuman, I didn't believe in a structure built from scratch that will rule the powers of the federal state. So I like this quote of Jean Monnet. Jean Monnet said, Europe will be forged in crisis and will be the sum of the solutions adopted for those crises. I think it's a good motto. If confederal institutions will emerge, maybe this will be the consequence of three factors. The first is the existence of a serious crisis that only can be resolved at the European level, and this crisis will lead to a new pragmatic European solution. That was the case for the coronavirus pandemic, for example. Secondly, if you want a lasting solution at European level, it must be the result of negotiation and acceptance by all the member states. No country will be able to impose its own solution. So, and third, a real European policy, in my mind, must bring advantages to all the members. That's the principle. So I think that, for example, I'm federalist, but I think that defense and diplomacy, for example, are not concerned by this federalization process. The interest of each state in this domain are too diverging. So in my opinion, maybe the next step of a federalization could be the management of the border at European level. That's a fact. The migrants crisis still exists. More and more migrants want to come to Europe, and all the states are concerned by this problem. So that could be resolved firstly with the enforcement of Frontex, and secondly, by the creation of a permanent corps or border and coast guard at the European level. So the confederalization of Europe, in my mind, will be necessary, a long-term process. It is very interesting to look after the progressive evolution of the Eurozone and FCB since the crisis of the public debt in 2008 and the pandemic. EU institutions act like a very federal institution in some case, with the new policies like quantitative easing or common borrow. We are far from fiscal rectitude of the treaty. So I want to come back to Macron ideas. That the third question. For 4 years, Macron made a lot of political declaration and proposed a lot of ambitious reform for Europe. So the renewing, for example, the renewing of the NATO, and according to Emmanuel Macron, NATO is to link to American strategic interests. He thinks it's time for Europeans to deal themselves with security issues and want to introduce a treaty on defense that will make Europe more sovereign and less dependent from the US. So his speech, Mr. Macron used the word often the word sovereignty during, but his formulation is very ambiguous. This word sovereignty is not clear. We never know if he's talking about European sovereignty or French sovereignty. Maybe I think he wants merely won't defend the French interest in fostering the EU industrial or economical capacities. And Macron actually knows that the negotiation within the EU institution are long and complex, and especially it concerns sovereign powers. So, and there is another remark. I have another remark to do. If the French president is in line with French diplomatic tradition. So he has a strong activity both on the international and the European scenes. The French, in fact, the French constitution allows the presidents a large powers in the domains of defense and diplomacy, without dealing, that's very important, without dealing with the parliament. So it has a large freedom of action. And the French president used of course, this possibility to build a positive and dynamic image. For the public opinion, it's very important that a French president acts on the international scene and so is respected by political leaders. So fostering an image of a leader is also a necessity when it gets tough on domestic situation. And that's the case in France. At the moment, the social environment is difficult because of different causes. So we have first the reform of the pensions. So that at the moment discussed. Then we are the crisis of yellow vests caused by increased tax on petrol, and we are the chaotic management of the pandemic. So for Macron, a positive image is crucial because the campaign for the French presidential election begin in next September. So another remark is that the political agenda is very favorable to Emmanuel Macron. Recently, on Europe Day, he launched the conference on the future of Europe in Strasbourg. It was on the Europe Day. He did that with Mrs. von der Leyen and Mr. Sassoli, the president of the European Parliament. And another thing is that at the beginning of the next year, France will take the presidency of the Council of the European Union. So we don't have much precisions about this priority. We only have the claims for this event. It's called Relance, Puissance, Appartenance. That is recovery, power, belonging. So we will enter in a very interesting electoral period in France because election will soon begin. And however, the electoral race will be very tough this next year. I think so, because according to the polls, Mr. Macron and Mrs. Le Pen, who is the president of the Rassemblement National, the National Rally, are almost equal in the second round. So, in my opinion, to finish with this question, in my opinion, the major threat to Schuman's Europe is the threat on the states, on each state's identity. So, in my mind, Europe, like a federal state, must impose certainly respect of common value, but on another hand, member states must have a great freedom on civil rights or family rights, for example. Is it clear today that the progressive leaders of Western Europe want to impose their standard on the Eastern states? I think that allocation of recovery plan funds, for example, to the allocation of the recovery plan is linked with the respect of the rule of law is maybe a way to achieve this. So on the last question about to reduce the high and increasing difference in the standard of living within the EU, Macron wants to introduce an EU minimum wage, and he wants also new rules for posted workers, those workers sent by an employer to work in another member state on a temporary basis. But it's rather a measure, I think, to protect jobs in France. So I think my speaking time is over, so I'm giving the floor to the next speaker. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Garnier, but of course stay with us and we will continue and we will ask you later on as well for more extended speech. And, you know, I mean, when you were speaking, you know, I just, it's reminding me, you know, that what Schuman said, the Europe will not be built overnight, neither without obstacles on this way. It is construction, its construction will follow the way of the spirit. Nothing that lasts happens easily. Europe is already on its way. And beyond the existing institutions, the European idea, its spirit of solidarity as a community have taken the root. So I just get the feeling that you are basically indicating that we cannot speed up that process, because if we face with a human being, with the nations, with their culture, with their tradition, so we cannot remove that diversity, that, you know, origins, the culture, the religion, you know. This is what is the power of the European nations. So therefore we cannot speed up that. So the institutions, economy is important, as Schuman said, but it cannot be over that what is the base for us European nations. So next I will, you know, ask for a speech is a Professor Peter Hermann from the Human Rights Center at the Law School of CSU. And of course, Professor, you can you have your own choice to which of the questions or topics you would like to refer. But I am just, you know, I would like, you know, to present the other questions we put on the table. Of course, you don't need to answer all of them, but, you know, I'm just presenting these questions to have basically in the memory what is on the table of that conference for the future of Europe. So one of these topics, very important topics on the conference of future of Europe, is the question, is the issue of the differences in the standard and living of citizens at the European Union. This was indicated by the Conference of the Future as one of the most important issues. So there is a question, you know, why they are so big and increasing differences, you know. So as we basically know, the Community of European Nations should basically, go in the direction of the balance. It means, from myself, I'm an economist, so from the economics point of view, points of view, the balance delivers the highest efficiency for the European economy. But if we go much far away from the balance, we are losing the efficiency. So we are losing as well the competitive edge on the against the other economic regions in the world. So, Professor Hermann, it's really, once again, thank you very much indeed that you had time to join us. And now, go ahead. The floor is yours, please.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. Taking the time, I have actually only 15 minutes to talk about 60 years. And this is what we are looking at, concentrating on this question, what European Union may do to come back to the unity, solidarity, and peace. The question is really, for me, a historical one. Although I'm not a historian, I'm economist as well, and in this case,
No, go ahead, Professor. Go ahead. It's okay.
It works, is it?
No, it's okay, Professor. We hear you very well. It's okay.
So first, I want to make some methodological remarks. And look then at where do we stand actually today, because the situation is definitely a different one compared with that of Schuman, I don't know, and Gasperi. Then the inequalities, you are right. I think this is a core issue of the entire state where we are now. We are at a European Union that is characterized by difference, by inequalities, and not just inequalities in very general terms, but by severe imbalances. And then I want to look at really the three issues, unity, solidarity, and peace. What does it mean actually today? So first, methodological remarks. there is usually or often made reference to doctrines, model, and I think we have to be careful with that. At least we have to think about how does this relate actually to reality, because models are a kind of theoretical blueprint. Doctrines are visions in a very general terms, but as such, they are not linked to reality. So what are we talking about? Is it a vision in terms of eclectical ideas of how to move on from wherever we stand at the time of Schuman, at today's time of Macron? Or is it an analytical approach? And we always have to think about this approach as concentrating something. The actual diversity cannot really be grasped when we are talking about models and modeling. We have an idea and we try to develop a framework in which we can shape reality, understand reality, and shape reality. So the vision at the time of Schuman and at the time today, what is it? Is it starting from the past? Is it starting from the present, or is it a vision where we have a general idea about what the future should be, could be, and then try to approach it? This is, I think, very important, as we always, as I said in the beginning, have to relate to the historical reality. And the historical reality at the time of the foundation of what became the European Union at a much later stage was one after the Second World War, after the experience of the First World War, more or less short time before that. And this is, of course, something different to the situation today, where we do not have this common experience of those countries that are now members of the European Union. This historical reality is something where we have to think about a complex understanding of the situations, emphasize of the situations of the plural. At the beginning, it was actually more or less a simple complexity of the situation after the Second World War and of a world system that had been shaped by clear borders, by clear lines of how to organize it. It was, as I said, the past of the war. It had been the two world systems standing as an opposition against each other. And it had been something where only this seemed to matter, meaning the two sides of the border, communism, socialism, whichever term you want to use, and capitalism, Western democracies, again, whichever term you want to use. This is important as it made clear what the need for solidarity actually would be. Today, we have a more complex situation where actually these clear borders that existed at the time do not exist anymore. At the time, there was economically as well the need to cope with the situation of a distracted continent. It was clear what was needed in economic terms. It was re-establishing the countries, re-establishing simply as well the possibility to consume, and this consumption had been something of urgency. Again, something that is very different from the situation today, where we can say we live, and then I come already implicitly to the question of inequality, where we have, on the one hand, if you want a too large wealth, we are not confronted, in general terms, our societies are not confronted anymore with consumption of necessary goods. Having said this, this is, of course, something where we look at those who are better off in a situation that is better off. At the same time, we have a huge number and a growing number, actually, of people within the countries, member states of the European Union now, and between them of inequality. People simply not having enough to survive. This is a situation already characterizing the situation today, and it is something that is increasingly important. Ideologically, we have had, at the time of the foundation, of course, this strong wish of this, meaning the war should never happen again. And at the time, it was a relatively clear understanding of the background of the war. This was, as I said, the two systems standing against each other. And this was the challenge at the time, which is nowadays more difficult because we do not have anymore this clear-cut Christian tradition on the one hand, this understanding of democracy, again on the one hand, and something that was opposed, or at least apparently opposed to it. Today, we have a diffuse situation of multilateral relationships and multi-centered relationships. This world is not as clear-cut as it had been. If it is a reality, or if it is only the perception and the knowledge about the other, increasingly possible by mass media, by social media, and is another question. It doesn't matter. In fact, we have to face at least the awareness, the consciousness, there is the other, and the other is a multiplicity of others. And this is a multiplicity in terms of ideologies, in terms of strength, of economic strength, in terms of legal systems, and so on and so forth. So this characterizes the political socio-economic situation. And then we come to the geopolitical constellation, or I want to use actually something more like geo-economic situation. We have at this stage not the division, if you want, into three worlds. At the time we talked about the third world countries, meaning the Western, the Eastern, and the so-called third world. But we have a mix there as well, that actually many of these countries that had been in the group of the developing, so-called developing countries, are now in one or another way part of this global system and integrated in this. Many countries, Brazil, China, and others, Argentina, are actually in some areas much stronger than those countries that had been in the leading in a leading position. Still, and this is the question then of inequality, I think the opportunities of different countries is hugely diversified, and we cannot speak of economic equality, but we have to face the, in a way, or at some stages, violent approach of leaving certain areas, leaving certain countries behind, not providing the opportunities, but insisting, and this is mainly a question of international trade, insisting of a strong role, not least by Germany as export-oriented country, or export-oriented economy. So this is important in terms of maintaining inequalities, of maintaining the way of which economic forces are actually distributed. I had been recently writing something on the so-called CEE countries that they actually could not catch up, as it had been suggested in '89 by Helmut Kohl, just getting the blossoming country sides of Germany. It had not been possible because it was always the corn chamber of Germany, now Eastern Germany, And this had been maintained intentionally by the still ongoing West Germany. And this you can see as well on the general level if you look at the periphery, at the center periphery relations in the now much larger Europe than it had been at the time of the foundation. And this was always a question when it came to enlargements. Can we cope with poorer countries joining the European Union? Then, of course, you have something that is different in terms of terminology even. At that time, we had been talking about the European Economic Community. And today we are talking about the European Union. And this is something where I want to point on the one hand on a contradiction in the question, do we actually want, or can we cannot go back to these values if we have an entirely different system. We talked about the European community, and now we are talking about the union. So going back would require actually to say we are dissolving what is today Europe, and we would start from the scratch. This may be an option, but at least we have to be aware of the fact that this is really a fundamental, a radical approach. So the European Economic Community, Schuman had been talking about the community. It is not only a question of the size, but it is as well something, and I quote now from Macron, working with different entities, states, corporations, local players, associations, government as warrant. This is, on this scale, hardly something to be reached. You could do it in a small unity with a very clearly defined common interest. If you want to integrate more forces, there is a major structural challenge to do this when it comes to this kind of community building. Community is something where we need direct contract and where we can have direct contract. And this is something that can hardly be maintained today. So then coming to the question of the state and how to maintain these values, even if we are working in a completely different setting, the question is of imbalances of the stakeholders. If we go and look at the different stakeholders I just mentioned with Macron, they are not equal powers. They have different powers, and Schuman was actually talking about a very strict legislation against monopolies. Fine. Can we reach this today? Again, this would be a radical break with the situation we have today. And if I consider that the European Union has huge difficulties to solve the problem of tax evasion by Microsoft actually producing in Ireland, owing Ireland I think it had been 13 billion euro, and Ireland refusing to take this money because it was of advantage for Ireland as a low tax country. If we have so huge difficulties to cope with such situation, I'm wondering, can we go back, or in which way can we have a radical break on this level, on this scale, as we would need it? I would be very much in favor of it. I would be much in favor of a just tax system, but at the moment, I do not see anything that allows us to move into this direction. The understanding of community has as well another point, now talking about the legal side of it. Today, the legal situation in Europe is hugely complex. It's highly differentiated, and there is, of course, talking about the rule of law, always a good reason to have this in place. But at the same time, this system of legislation cannot cope anymore with something that is outside of the law. And this is a much debated issue in jurisprudence, that we have to think about new forms of governance. In which way? And this is something I may consider as well a little bit in line, as well, at least with Macron, not to talk about nation states anymore, but to talk about interest groups, if you want. This had been by Schuman, by Teubner, discussed in law, brought forward. We are talking about expertise in different areas, and expertise is not the expertise of those who are educated, but those who are interested in certain questions. This could be medical, as we face the pandemics now. This could be something of a medical citizenry. It could be something of data protection citizenry or big data citizenry, people who are involved in these questions. These would be experts in the strict sense, but it would be as well citizens who are especially engaged with this. Again, a radical approach needed. And then, of course, we have to face the question, can we do this within the framework of human rights as it exists? Again, something that had been established after the Second World War, in a way going parallel with the establishment of the European Union. And I think personally, this, I'm hesitating now to say this has to be questioned as well, but at least we have to think about, is this concept of human rights still as such valid without redefinition, without revisiting it, when it comes to the question of those countries who had been periphery, that had been not acknowledged as part of the world system, that they claim their rights now as well. As I said, it's Brazil, it's China. They are on the forefront. Macron refers as well in a very positive way to the Silk Road and says at the same time, we do not have this as Europe. After the Second World War, Schuman and his companions had this vision of we have to re-establish peace, and of course we have to establish peace in this capitalist understanding of a dominance, actually, or of a growing importance of Europe in this tripartite system of United States, Japan at the time, and Europe. Now we have to rethink this in a, as I said, more complex situation where we do not have pure capitalism, where we do not have pure liberalism, where we have state intervention, but at the same time we have not a state interventionist system. We have the social state or welfare state, but at the same time it is more and more a private welfare state. So these are challenges, I think, and this was basically my major point I wanted to make, to say we cannot simply go back, because the situation had been a fundamentally different one. Not only in terms of what we can do, but as well in terms of the values of the definition. Peace at that time, it had been clear what it had meant, what was meant by it. Peace today is a completely different story. Solidarity is something at that time meant re-establish the system after the Second World War, overcome the destruction. Today, it is again something different. Today, it means overcoming inequality instead of allowing it to increase. So I think this is something of immediate importance now, and I come to close with this when it comes to the health sector facing the pandemic, which is not something where we simply need money to be spent and to be distributed, but where we have to have a global, and there I go beyond Europe, where we need a global approach of cooperation, of common understanding, of overcoming differences, to face this pandemic, to face the challenges for the health sector and for the health system and for our living conditions. Because, of course, international trade, all this plays a role as well in what some people say will be a common problem on the agenda, meaning pandemic after pandemic and after pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Herman, for very interesting, I think, considerations. This will, I'm sure, help us, to continue our discussion and our meeting, to make it more fruitful. So I just like to cite, that what is very well known, Schuman, expression, he said, my idea is not to merge states to create a super state. Our European states are a historical reality. From psychological point of view, it would be impossible to do away with them. Their diversity is a good thing, and we do not intend to level them down or equalize them. So I find out in your speech, Professor, that you brought much of that statement of Robert Schuman. So you said, yes, that's right. We have a very complex environment now. We have much diversity. So the world, the situation is much more diversified. So therefore, this statement is the what is much more diversified. So the diversity is a feature of a community. So in community, you have diversification. So for community, the diversification is a very good thing. So therefore, heading into so-called uniform. So superstate is a uniform, right? So it's logically contradictory to diversification of the community. So logically saying, if we have diversified world, then the uniform, so superstate, is not something, is not system which is compatible to the, existing situation. You highlighted, you are right, Professor. We cannot move back, but I would like, to a little bit put a certain picture on that, why we cannot go back. But I would add, we need to adjust the direction. So I think the entire conference on the future of Europe is basically all about the adjustment of the direction. As you go by boat on the sea, you can now go back with the boat which is blown by the wind. So what you can do, you can just adjust a little bit your direction in that way or in the second. So if you notice, you are away from the right direction. You are just trying to adjust that. So that what we are facing is a need for adjustments. The question is what to adjust and how much to adjust. But we cannot say, yes, we just are, because of the past, we were forced to go in a certain direction, so we cannot move, we cannot change the direction. We cannot move back, you are right, but we can change the direction. And this is a different story. So therefore, I think, you know, Professor Herman, for myself, I don't know, like for the others, but for myself, your speech was very interesting and gave certain very interesting considerations to how we can perceive a different, you know, processes, how we can impact them, you know, how we can work on them, right? So, so this is very, I mean, value added. So, but of course, stay with us, Professor, and let's continue our, I mean, a debate. It seems to be from minute to minute more interesting and more interesting. So I would like to ask now, you know, Excellency Dr. Ewa Salkiewicz. She was a former ambassador in the Holy See. So Excellency, be so kind, you know, to, I mean, present your point referring to certain, I mean, questions I put before the debate. So floor is yours, please. Switch on your microphone, please.
Oh, yes. Now it's okay, yes?
Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. At the beginning, I would like to say that I am not an economist. I'm a lawyer and former diplomat. So for me, it was a little bit difficult to reply to that question you put for me, but I can try to respond. And by the end, I would like only to mention something what is very interesting for me from the legal point of view, because I'm a lawyer. But when first question was why there are so big and increasing differences in the standard of living of citizens, etc. So I would like to mention, I don't know if all of you read, but I read the special Eurobarometer survey, which is important because it says what the people think about it. And the vast majority, almost 92% across all member states, demand that the citizens' voices are taken into account in decisions relating to the future of Europe. So now about this conference on the future of Europe, what special Eurobarometer survey, which was taken last quarter of the last year, which is very recent, says about it. 3/4 of Europeans consider that the conference on the future of Europe will have a positive impact on democracy within the EU. And 76% agree that it represents significant progress for democracy within the EU. Now, about the citizens' voice in the EU. This is a very big standard because of 92% believing in the EU citizens' voices should be taken more into account. There are over 55% which totally agree. And I think this is a problem until now, because we can discuss as much as we want, but from proposals to implementation, it has to be a will, and it has to be a political will, first of all. Now, about the future of Europe, still relating to the special Eurobarometer. Having comparable living standards, 35% and the people say that it should be more put the impact on this equalizing, let's say, living standards and stronger solidarity among member states. This is over 30%. How to achieve that goal, it's another question, but I'm saying what could be done eventually to ameliorate the situation. Now about the background. As you know very well, that after the COVID, it was, let's say, the big problem because many countries and people outside criticize the slow vaccine rollout. We know about it, and now we have more experience. But what do we need for a stronger Europe? First of all, according to that review, the EU needs more democratic legitimacy. And I agree with that. Why? Because, for example, mayors and regional parliamentarians have a great deal of legitimacy, but of course they are not very much involved in that process of the EU. Therefore, the European Commission, which is appointed, also needs the support of national parliaments, and not only, but also the regional and local entities, such as municipal governments, to get legitimacy. And more, the EU needs more transparency in all phases of legislative process to re-establish its credibility. And by the end, the EU needs a stronger involvement of citizens, but also of national parliamentarians and regional representatives in the legislative process. In other words, the EU needs more subsidiarity. But unfortunately, I spoke about it with Professor Fabrini, whom I know, who created the Brexit Institute in Dublin, Ireland. And he also, although of course he is for the EU, but he was not very much optimistic about it, because he said that in the deadlines, in the topics for the future conference, there was not much about the subsidiarity. Later I will say why. However, we currently see the opposite, because the influence of national and regional parliamentarians has decreased year by year. Why? First of all, we have more EU regulations, but we have less and less directives. Directives, unlike regulations, give national parliaments and regional legislative assemblies the chance to be fully involved as lawmakers in the legislative procedures. Second, we also observe the same trend in the number of delegated acts, which are not subject to subsidiarity scrutiny by national parliaments. We can see that the number of delegated legal acts increased from 38 in 2012 to 116 in 2018, and reaching in 2020 125. What is more interesting even to see that the national parliaments, as you know, have the right to submit the reasoned opinion. It is so-called subsidiarity complaint, whenever they consider the draft legislative acts do not comply with the principle of subsidiarity. This is so-called yellow card procedure. In 2013, there were 83 such opinions. In 2017, 48. In 2018, 43. But can you imagine that in 2019, it has dropped to 0. I don't think it's because of COVID, but maybe, and amounted to only 12 in 2020. Why? The reason is really simple. National parliaments have realized that this yellow card procedure does not work properly. So therefore, we should rethink the procedure if we really mean it to work and are serious about strengthening the role of national and local parliamentarians in the EU makings. Now, the principle of subsidiarity should be put into effect in a more practical way. In 2018, there was so-called task force of subsidiarity, proportionality, and doing less, more efficiently. And of course, I was speaking with some people who were the member of them. And they already, this task already elaborated a recommendation in this regard. Why? in this case, there was said that the mayors and the municipal council members should play, like national parliamentarians, a more important role. But unfortunately, preparation for the conference on the future of Europe, which is scheduled to start soon in May 21, probably, it confirms a little bit my skepticism. Why? Because, as you know, the subsidiarity is not a priority on its agenda. The Committee of Region is not even invited to participate as a member in the executive board, but also only represented by an observer. The national parliaments too can only take part in an observer capacity. How? Via the Cossack Troika. So, of course, seeing that, one cannot be very optimistic. About the other questions, does the very high German share, etc., current balance? If not, why it is not in the agenda, etc. I have read some opinion of the former politicians about it, and I must here underline what José María Aznar, the former minister of Spain, said about it. It must be first built the political will to succeed in advance. So without political will, we can just talk and nothing will be done. The future of Europe, in his words, I agree, depends on our ability to build a common sensibility as Europeans, a difficult but not important task. And he says about some major challenges, which with three I agree, one I disagree. I will tell you why. The first, he's speaking about the economic turndown, a consequence of the pandemic. So, of course, everybody agrees it is a real fact. The second one, he talks about the structural challenges provoked by Brexit. This is also a very important event, which make a big gap in the functioning of the EU, not only from the financial point of view. The third one, which I disagree, is the ideological challenges provoked by populist and authoritarian movements within many member states. Because it depends what you mean by populist. Of course, our opposition would agree with that, because they always attack the peace, etc., for their programs, although they don't have any other programs themselves. So ideological challenges, I would not say that, because ideology has nothing to do with it. It depends only which party is in power, what the people want to achieve, and so on. Ideological, I would not even discuss about it. Why? Because as we know, in the real democracy, the majority governs, not minority. So I am not against the problem of the some, I don't want to mention here, which kind of ideological challenges we face now. But the question is that the minorities want to govern majority, which is not possible in the democracy. They can govern, of course, if they won elections. Why not? But not in that case. And the fourth item, which José María Aznar underlined, which I agree, there is the institutional challenge, the intra-institutional relationship between the European Union, between the European Parliament, the European Commission, and the European Council. This is very important. Also, there is one question we should have in mind here, that we cannot have rules without priorities, and we cannot have priorities without rules, because we need both. Otherwise, we will be talking about something. There is a core of values, like we said, human rights, rule of law, and other things, etc. Everybody agree. This is like the international law jus cogens, and this is okay. But for other reason, it depends on the internal policy for each independent country member of the EU to decide what they wish. Of course, now from the economic point of view, which I'm not economist, but I know and I read the documents, of course, that European single market, as we know, it's the largest barrier-free economic area in the world. Over 50 million citizens with a gross domestic product of around 30 trillion euro. And of course, this is a fact. What we need here it's the new growth agenda, progressive agenda, and also we need like the new conservative agenda. It means to maintain social cohesion through change. And of course, we need also the geopolitical priorities, vast domestic reform, and also protection of economic prospects in the middle class and so on. Why? Because the EU, in order to occupy an important place in the world, in my opinion, and also many other people, must strengthen its ties within the US and the transatlantic relationship. Because not only for Poland, but of course, from the beginning, this support, let's say, of the US, it's important for EU and vice versa. So it works, let's say, for both in positive way. Also, before I finish, I would like to underline two things. The last question was, what can be done to prevent Germany from gaining an expense of other in the Eurozone and so on? So this is like the academic question. Why? Because you know very well that Germany, topping ranking, put 17.2 billion euro more than it got out. So of course they have a different priorities. Poland was the biggest benefactor, as we know, within 11.6 billion euro earned. So it's okay. When I read the report of the Bertelsmann Foundation, they said that Germany, Europe's largest economy, benefited most in absolute terms from the single market, of course, earning an extra 86 billion euro a year because of it. And economic and social inequality also, as we know, contributed to the Britain's decision to vote to leave the EU. So this is very important and dangerous questions, not to do the same error in the future, because we cannot allow that other countries would leave. In 2019, Germany contributions to the EU was 25.82 billion euro, of course highest in the EU member states. France, the next one with 21 billions and so on, followed by Italy, almost 15 billions, and United Kingdom is 40 billions. Now, of course, it is not into consideration. Now the last question about Macron EU reform plan. Of course, it will be many plans before the EU conference. Of course, he, as a president of one of the biggest countries, of course, maybe the Chancellor of Germany could also present. Angela Merkel would be the Angela Merkel plan. Poland can present. It will be, let's say, President Duda plan or whatever. We can have many, many plans. But imagine, for example, in Weimar Triangle, it's only 3 countries, Poland, Germany, and France. And even between those 3 countries, it's not very easy to find a common way. Of course, Poland, for example, as I understood from what I read from the plan of Macron, we would be in favor of the uniform digital task. For other questions about the l'Europe à deux vitesses, etc., I have some problems, of course, and I don't think we would support that, the multi-speed Europe. But anyhow, only 3 countries, 3 different points of view almost. But what is important is that, for example, the other countries in the Visegrad group speak by one voice up till now. We will see what will happen after the decision of the tribunal in Luxembourg, as you know, because this was Czech Republic who is involved in it. Maybe it can create a problem. I hope not. But what I would like to finish by that, if we change something, it should be a reform. But which are the rules of the EU treaty reforms? As maybe you know, but for me it's interesting as a lawyer, that there is this Article 48 of the TEU. And there are only 2 ordinary revision procedures. One is a simplified one procedure, and another one is the amendment of the treaties by ordinary revision. So what does it mean, a simplified revision procedure? It is for revising all or part of the provisions of Part 3 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, TFEU, relating to the internal policies and action of the EU. In this case, the European Council, acting by unanimity, after consulting the European Parliament, of course, and the Commission, may adopt the decision amending all or parts of the provision of Part 3 of the TFEU, which shall not enter into force until it is approved by the member states, all member states. So imagine if here we have three states within the Visegrad group which have difficulties, it is almost impossible to get unanimity for such a case. That is why there are some people, they will, of course, we have the other procedure like a passerelle clause, etc. But of course, it is not very active within the European Parliament. Of course, we know also another project which was presented by Prodi, so-called Penelope project, which of course it was not, let's say, accepted, because the project said that if by a given date 5/6 of the member states have ratified this agreement, and that the member states which have not ratified, I deem to have decided to leave the Union. So of course it is too risky and we cannot accept that. That is why wherever this Article 48 will be amended, maybe, and the matter should be referred to the European Council, we should think if maybe it's not better to think about the majority. Because, as you know, for example, in such a big organization like the United Nations, which is almost 10 times more than EU, because they have 200 almost member states, in Article 108, I think, there is about the revision of the Charter, and it says that it has to be about 2/3 of the people when there is a conference, to take 2/3 of the member states, of course. But if we need the unanimity of 27 in the EU, taking into account what is going now and the independent and sovereign countries has different interests, I think it is very difficult to imagine that it can be obtained. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor, for very, a clear, drawing the clear picture of the center points of our discussion. Yes, you said very, indicated a very important, point, that in the Conference on Future of Europe, the national parliaments are observers. It shows that we face some centralized system in Brussels. I cannot imagine where in the community, let's assume in my family, yes, I decide,
It's a dictatorship.
Yeah, I just decide, I just put some on the table for discussion. And I say to my wife and children, you are observers, okay? Of course, you can talk something, but you just observe, right? So psychologically, this is not community, approach. The community needs to engage entity as an equal partner, okay? So this is very strange, and we put that on the paper. We as an organization, Institute of Schuman thought, with a great experts like you are. The outcome of that debates is going to be a paper report we are going to send to the basically different institution partners, national parliaments, as well European parliaments. And we are going to indicate one of these points, exactly that what you reflected, that it cannot be like that. National parliaments are just observers, right? It's against the logic. It's against the spirit of the community. The second, you highlighted the community of regions. So a month ago, I just met with leaders of the community of regions, in internet, and they express that they are very worried about that discrepancy between the perception of citizens of different countries, and the discrepancy of the perception of the, people sitting in the Brussels, in the Commission, right, in the Parliament. So they said there is a big discrepancy. And the role, you know, the community of regions, in the community of regions, you know, they are sitting at people from our environment. Yeah, many of them, I know them, and they cannot be treated like observers, okay? It's, you know, we just, thank you very much indeed, Professor, you just delivered a case, example, which is showing that it's contradictory, okay? Why this is important? We are not just arguing, we just would like to say that this declines the quality. You proved, you know, in different other points and statements that we are, we like to, work towards the higher quality. And exactly as Professor Herman said, yes, we cannot move back, but we need to adjust this, right? The adjustment is very important. But to adjust, we should know what to adjust, how to adjust. This is a very, we need to make a very detailed diagnosis. It's not just, you know, any general, walk. It's not just a random walk. I am, you know, giving a lecture to students about, you know, the probability distributions, random walk, and the financial econometrics, but we cannot here accept the random walk, okay? This should be very logically under some certain, a control. And thank you very much that you as well highlighted that the Germans are gaining much more than they are adding. It's not nothing against the Germany, but as I said on the beginning, if we have not balanced in economy, of course, it doesn't mean that each country will be of the potential of Germany or France or Netherlands, right? It's not going about the same, but it's not. It cannot be. The discrepancies, the differences cannot be so big because from the economic logic point of view, we lose the efficiency, and we are losing currently, you know, the European Union economy is declining against the entire world, against the economy, global economy. It's declining, the efficiency, and as well as declining, you know, the Eurozone economy. We will talk later on as well about that. I will present some table so that to show the numbers. So we are just focused on not just, being jealous that, you know, France is more well-being, or Germany. No, we are not jealous. We like to be smart, building a very good balanced economy. Because, you know, like a bank, if bank will not take care about the customers and they become poorer and poorer, then at some time is not able to generate the income, because the income for the bank are coming from his customers. If they are poor, or if they default, if they are, in a miserable stage, they cannot generate the income to the bank. So therefore, I am highlighting, if we will have a very unbalanced economy in Europe, we will be more and more inefficient, so less competitive. So I'm very interesting with some comments of Professor Pablo de la Fuente from Spain. He has usually very, original comments, and we treat Professor de la Fuente as a disputant. Be some kind, to referring to our speakers, to put your light and put your opinion about that questions, issues we discuss. So go ahead, Professor, the floor is yours.
Good evening, do you listen me?
Yes, great.
Well, I will start my exposition trying to answer the questions that you put me. Well, I remember almost 20 years ago when Spain do the transition from the peseta, the ancient peseta, the old peseta, to the new euro, no? For a lot of people, well, what is the consequence of all that? And on TV, there are a lot of campaigns of AD in order to explain the people what's the euro and the consequences, and don't worry, it doesn't matter. And I remember in a program on TV, a professor of economy, Fabián Estapé, was a professor of the University of Barcelona, a very good economist, with responsibilities also in the government, was also not only an academic, was also a good manager. And well, the speaker asked him, well, professor, what is the euro? No? And well, but please explain for all the people something easy, because you, the economists, are complicated people. And well, I will be brief. Fabián Estapé said, the euro is a coin of 2 Dutch marks. That's all. And I think that I explained the situation. And that's true, because it's the value. If the value of the peseta was 166 pesetas, and I remember that a Dutch mark was something else of 80 pesetas, something like that. Well, he said it's a coin of 2 Dutch marks. And that's true, because, well, nowadays in Europe, well, and he said also, I remember, nowadays in the future, the Europe Central Bank will be a casino where the Germans made the gaming chips and they give us, and that's all. Well, in this situation, there are a lot of propaganda against Mr. Estapé. No, this is a common coin, a common currency for everybody, but this is not true. Nowadays, as Professor Estapé said, Germany controls the casino bank. They made the chips, and that's all. But also, we can say, well, Germany, and the anti-German discourse. Well, in some points, I'm agree, but in other, no, because I think in your proposal, you asked me for the situation of the losers, like France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Greece. And well, perhaps there are the circumstances, but I think that also the main guilty of this situation of the losers, they are the losers themselves. And I think that I can separate in 2 divisions. The case of France and Italy, and also the other 3 countries, Spain, Portugal, and Greece. Why? Because France and Italy, we can consider them founding fathers of the European Union. It's not the same. In the case of Portugal and Greece, and especially Spain that I know, yes, the problem is that Spain joined, in this time was the common market was the name of the community, too late. And well, Spain asked for being member of a club established. And well, normally when you knock the door of a club, the first thing that the members of the club do is show you the rules, no? And well, for Spain, normally Spain is a country of Europe. I think is the most Euro-optimistic country, and also is the most Euro-optimistic country with the lowest level of knowledge about the European Union. Both elements are true. Because, for example, one of the things that I said, well, when Spain meets the European Union, the GDP per capita was the 80% of the average of the European Union in the 80s, and now is 2 or 3 points more. Well, this is a lie. I don't know. There are an American politician who said in the world in life there are 3 kinds of statements: the lies, the true, and the statistics. Well, and this is one of the cases, because Spain, perhaps at the moment that Spain joined the common market, has an 80% of average respect the GDP per capita. But at the moment that Spain joined the Europe in the 80s, the comparison was with the Europe to 12. Nowadays, if this is 1 or 2 more points, the last data that I have was before the Brexit, is in the Europe of the 28, after the integration of a lot of countries with economies not so powerful for Spain. That's true that for Spain, I think at the end, Europe has not been a good business. But in order to start an anti-German discourse, an easy anti-German discourse, I think that perhaps the Spaniards, we must analyze what is our situation, because I think that everyone is guilty of its mistake of his mistakes, and this is the case of Spain. This is the case of mistake. That's true that when Spain joined the European Union, sacrificed a lot, a huge part of its fishing fleet, and dismantled a huge part of the heavy industry. That's true, but this is the start of the game. And also it's true that if we are now the Spaniards the losers, is because we are responsible for our acts and our facts. For example, for me the most clear sample is Mr. Zapatero. Mr. Zapatero, I report you, is a kind of Spanish version of Mr. Bean, who was Prime Minister of Spain. And I show you the transition, for example, is clear. The transition from the Treaty of Nice to the Treaty of Lisbon from 2001-2007. In 2001, Spain has a solid alliance with Italy, with Poland, and with Great Britain, and was in fact, with the rules of this treaty, a counterpower of the Axis Paris-Berlin. But was Mr. Zapatero who signed a treaty against the interests of Spain. Who are guilty of that? The Spaniards, that we bought the bad guys. This is not, there are not other questions. Also, that's true that the Germans has a preeminent situation, but in the case of Spain, when I analyze it, is a disaster. Sometimes in other meetings of this organization, we talk about the education and the formation of the political responsibles. But in Spain, it's clear. I show I show the sample of Mr. Zapatero, who didn't defend the national interest of Spain, in order to be an Euro-optimistic and don't make obstacles to the European integration. But that's true that the Treaty of Lisbon for Spain was really very very bad. Nowadays, for example, one of the questions is the leadership. In Spain, we have the question is not if we have a right, a conservative or a socialist government. We can discuss after that. Is the human quality of the members of that. Nowadays, in our government in Spain, we have people who is minister and his only experience is to be cashier in a supermarket a few months only. Yes, it's Mrs. Irene Montero, and is the favorite of the former Vice President Pablo Iglesias, this guy of Podemos. Well, yes, that's true. When we talk about politics, well, you can be socialist, you can be liberal, or you can be conservative, but you must need some preparation for your responsibility, and that's all. For example, only I remember, because is the question. For example, the Spain, this pathologic Euro-optimistic of Spanish. Well, in a debate in this foundation, I crossed some words with a German general, no? And I do, well, is the geopolitical situation in Africa? And I did, this is my opinion. And he answered me, this is not true that you said, because I don't know, because I was member of the commission that negotiated with Spain the situation of Ceuta and Melilla. Well, it's a pity, but the reality is the fact that we see in the border with Morocco the last week. Spain, perhaps the situation for Spain, the structure of the European Union is not good for the interest of Spain. But our problem is the quality of our leaders. In this week, the facts happen in the border with Morocco, first of all, show that for Spain, the European Union, because it's territory Frontex, Ceuta, and the NATO is a bad business. Nowadays, after a threat of invasion of the Moroccan forces, the answer of the United States is the Al Capone who lead a band of gangsters called the NATO, is celebrating an air exercise with the Air Force of Morocco and using a Spanish air base at Moron and Sevilla. Well, that's true. That's true. That's true that perhaps the situation is not good for Spain. But the most responsibility of all of that, we are the Spaniards, because we sit in the power, this kind of people who are not able to defend our interests. I talk of the sample of Spain, but I think that the quality, Spain is a new partner from the 80s. But if we take the founding fathers, for example, like France or Italy, I have not level for talking about the Italian politics. You need 3 doctorates for analyze all this spectacle. No? But for example, for me, the serious country of France, for example, nowadays France, who has an image of power of partner of the Germans. Well, I read some novels by Gabriel García Márquez or Mario Vargas Llosa, for example, The Autumn of the Patriarch, and I see Macron normally in a consolidated democracy. There are a phenomena like Macron, who has a party in March, who is the capital letters of his name. Is a personal party like a Latin American dictator. Well, this is the base. With all these people, we are not able to go anywhere. This is my humble opinion. How we repair that I think, the economy is something, for example, that we can to renegotiate. I think in Europe, we have the Spaniards. First of all, the problem are not the Germans. That's true that Germany is a risk, because Germany wants all the advantage of the leaderships, but in order, for example, to lead a common defense, for example, there are the NATO. That the NATO is a negative organization of the interest Europe. I don't understand why nowadays the Spanish Air Force is defending the skies of Romania, and we have a tank battalion deployed in Latvia. And after all that, where are our partners of the NATO, where we have a problem in our borders with Morocco? Nowhere. Is the positive statement that doesn't work. And always also create a super state for what? For do the ridiculous with AstraZeneca in the case of the vaccination in Europe. Well, but I want to be auto-criticized. The Greece, for example, in the case of Portugal, I think that nowadays has a socialist party controlling the power, but he is doing an intelligent policy in order to leave all its problems. I think that taking finally the idea of Schuman, first of all, there are the nations, the partners, who must to change, to do some internal changes in order to renegotiate the situation. The losers, we are guilty of our problems. The most normal is when you lose a match, always the referee is not our friend and they are part of the other team. That's not true. Perhaps the referee is not the best, but I think that the root of the problem is nowadays the rulers of these losers. No? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. We are talking about the losers and winners, and I would like, to be more specific, to deliver a table so that our audience in internet, and we are, discussing, speaking here, are on the same page. So I'm referring here an analysis made by the Center for European Policy in 2019 under the title Europe Impact on Economics, Winners and Losers, which was made by the German think tank. It was in Freiburg, And it was, in fact, as I remember, made by on the request of the European Commission. So this shows, you know, how implemented euro 20 years ago impacted the European economy. So speaking about the winners and losers, we need to think about the entire European economy. In fact, as we see here, so this analysis was, I mean, as per opinion, different experts, was made very professionally. And this analysis shows how much the GDP of different countries increased or declined. So as we see the German as a winners, they won 3,203 billion euros as an additional GDP, nominal GDP. Netherlands, 717 billions as a winners, some small piece Greece, and then we approach losers. The big loser is Spain, Belgium, Portugal. Very big loser is France, which is, excuse me, before I cited a little bit wrong. So France lost minus 3,591 billion euros in GDP. So we can, I mean, in Italy, 4,325 lost billion euros in GDP. It means that all European Eurozone lost 6,392 in GDP. It means that if we would not introduce the euro, we would increase the GDP of Europe by that big number. Implementing the euros in a not appropriate time, which means that the assumption from the economic point of view, the assumption for implementing the common currency is that all economies should be very balanced, should have a very common equal potential. So then implementation of a common currency will not degrade, will not, create such a losses. So look, what is the balance per year? The entire Eurozone, it's almost similar to the European Union. Each year, over 20 years, lost minus 320 billion euros on GDP. So the production, the GDP value each year over 20 years was lower by 320 billion euros. So these numbers are reflecting what means the basically assuming or getting a wrong decisions. And these wrong decisions are basically bringing the European economy to the declined position, to the basically, of course, we have winners, Germany, Netherlands, but the others are losers. So the very interesting conclusion out of this speech of Professor De La Fuente for me, that the losers from now ahead, we cannot agree on losing anymore. You are right, Professor. we as the losers, I mean, Poland, no, because we were not in the European, euros. But remember, the Eurozone, the Euro economy, the decline of that GDP impacted as well all other countries in the European Union. So, Professor De La Fuente, you are right. We agreed, we basically accepted as losers that situation. And this is as well our fault. So the conclusion out of that should be, we shouldn't agree not anymore on, on that wrong direction. So as Professor Herman said, no getting back step back, but adjust this. And the second picture shows, look, this is a share of the countries at the European Union in cumulated current balance of payment, accumulated for the period 2004-2020. So for the joining Poland and the other East European countries joining the European Union. So look what we have. The German economy is responsible for almost 90% of the current balance. The rest is just working for the Germany. This picture shows that. The rest of the Europe is working for the Germany. And as I said on the beginning, we, being logically thinking economists and politicians, we do not approach from the perspective of the jealous. I like German economies developing well, but having that unbalance, that big imbalance, we are bringing European economy and the European Union to the very bad shoes in the future. This is the conclusion. So I just wanted to present these numbers so that all people in the internet and we are on the same page. I mean, speaking because there were many words, losers and winners. Now we know what's going on, what we are talking about. And again, we are not attacking the Germany. We are going to improve the European Union economy. If we do not get the conclusions now, we are going to go in a more difficult situation. My studies last year made based on the, accumulated gains in growth of GDP around the world for 85 countries in the world, like China, India, US. So the countries which are responsible for 90% of the global GDP, and within these countries are European, countries as well. So, and this cumulated gain in GDP for the last 10 years, minus the losses during pandemic, shows that this difference is positive for the China, India, America, Australia, Canada, Brazil. And this difference is negative for all West European countries, including Spain, France, Italy, and Germany, United Kingdom as well. So, we basically work for our common good future. So we should, basically realize that. And my question is, very important question is, why conference about the future of Europe did not touch this point? This is a very, a most important point, from the perspective of the model of the economy of European Union. Okay. So this is a very important, I mean, I think we need to deliver to different, I mean, European institutions and as well national parliaments, you know, in the process of this discussion about the contribution of our debate on that. So now I would like, you know, to challenge Jan Czarniecki, who is a diplomat, you know, to a short speech referring to that topics we discuss now. So be so kind, the floor is yours. Jan Czarniecki, a diplomat.
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's great.
Professor Krysiak, thank you for this opportunity, and I would like to thank all the previous speakers. At the beginning, I'd like to clarify one point. I was involved with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but currently I'm an independent professional. Topic of my paper is about what can be done to prevent Germany from gaining at the expense of others in the Eurozone, and again using the winners and losers classification that the previous speakers have been addressing. I would like to start with the following quotation from Robert Schuman from the 1950 Schuman Declaration to put my speech in some sort of framework and leitmotif. Europe will not be made all at once according to a single plan. It will be built through concrete achievements which first create a de facto solidarity. The second one is world peace cannot be safeguarded without the making of creative efforts proportionate to the dangers which threaten it. I've purposely taken these two quotes as my leitmotif, stressing the concept of solidarity and proportionality of dangers per Schumann's wisdom. Also, in terms of the Catholic social teaching, such solidarity is a firm and persevering determination to commit oneself to the common good, not merely some vague compassion or shallow distress of the misfortunes of others, as St. John Paul II said. It is solidarity which flows from faith that is fundamental to the Christian view of social and political organization. Each person is connected to and dependent on all humanity, collectively and individually. How much of this thinking remains in the mind of Brussels decision makers is to be seen, but I believe and optimistically that with the implementation of the new European Recovery Fund in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, there is an opportunity. I would like to start by going back to April of last year when Chancellor Angela Merkel was asked during a press conference about what she would do to help Italy and Spain, countries deemed here as the losers in this presentation, to cope with the fallout from the coronavirus, a question she had been asking people in Rome and Madrid for a very long time. She insisted that Germany is already helping and would continue to do so, and stated, Europe's well-being is not just a question of solidarity, it is a matter of self-interest. That is why it almost hurts to have to repeat myself. For me, this goes without saying. The German Chancellor's indignance, that is the feeling or showing anger because of something unjust or unworthy, over suggestions that her commitment to the European project is anything less than absolute, reflects the growing disconnect, I believe, the coronavirus has created in Europe. As leaders in Germany and other northern countries of Europe insist they will do everything they can to safeguard the EU, their counterparts in the south and in the western part of Europe, the far west, demand and continue to demand much more. So far, Berlin has offered distressed countries little more than encouragement. Many were hoping that Germany, which has so far weathered the crisis better than most, will agree to open its wallets. When the pandemic began last year, Chancellor Merkel was one of the first leaders to grasp this terrible scourge. It would become the modern-day version of earlier worldwide catastrophes. In March last year, she told a television audience, "This is serious. You should take it seriously also. since our German unification? No, since World War II. There has been no challenge like this one where our common solidarity matters so much. At first, it seemed as though her country had heeded her call. Spring and summer German policymakers acted swiftly last year, decisively. The virus was raging everywhere, also here in Poland. Virus cases stayed low and the country began to reopen. She was hailed as an example, a shining example. Fast forward, warnings, including hers, of a second pandemic wave were widely ignored by all. The results were horrific. With the winter spike a few months ago, the national death toll exceeded 87,000 as of May 2021. Before COVID-19 pandemic, Merkel era saw Germany's economy come back from a deep malaise to become the world's fourth largest economy, with quickly rising living standards, nearly full employment, government surpluses. In fact, as the fallout from the coronavirus is making more explicit day by day, the odds were stacked in Germany's favor from the outset. However, what about the solidarity factor as it concerns the Eurozone and the rest of Europe? What indeed is the solidarity aspect? If we go to a broader perspective, though having huge implications, is President Joe Biden's recent turnaround on the Nord Stream 2 project, which will enable the construction of the final, I believe, 80 kilometers of pipework section under the Baltic to continue and be completed. Poland and Ukraine will be bypassed, and Germany will become the distribution hub of all of Europe's crucial hydrocarbon fuels, strengthening Germany's position even more. Stepping out of the Eurozone for another minute, I would like to mention the countries of the Bucharest Nine, for which the turnaround, just that I mentioned, of the suspended situation was a huge disappointment. A de facto present for Putin and Germany, as the concerns of Central Eastern Europe associated with the project were largely ignored. In a narrower view of Nord Stream 2, a cash bonanza will be provided to rebuild the Russian military. Words do have consequences after all, and someone in Washington just does not understand Russian politicians, thinking that by agreeing to give Nord Stream 2 the green light, Germany will drive a more demanding policy when it comes to China. Maybe that is naive, as so many German firms are dependent on China for production and its markets, how much they would lose by cooling these relations by such a move. This is not the case. This time Moscow decided, in effect, Russia to remain neutral. Russia will not enter into crusade against Peking. Russia seems to be at the point of neutrality. As a member of the European Union? No. In 4 weeks, there will be meetings of Biden and Putin from the region for more clarity. However, Europe is threatened by Russian tactical nuclear weapons and minority. Why have I brought this up about Central Europe when I'm to talk about Western and Southern Europe? Because it is part of Europe and needs to be, in solidarity and for the sake of world peace. Considered in such areas affecting not only this part of Europe that I'm in, but also the rest of Europe and the EU. That solidarity has been lacking when it comes to Germany's approach to dealing with Italy, Spain, and France. Europe's weakest economies emerged from the pandemic even less competitive than they were going in and burdened by even more debt. What is the case for them to remain members of the Eurozone? Can the Euro survive without these two? Germany is the key to resolving the problem. That is mainly because Germany is part of the problem. Right? Europe's political fulcrum, a responsibility its leaders are both uncomfortable with and have been unwilling to take on. Doing so requires them to confront the truth. In Germany's popular imagination, the euro has been a success because, why? It leveled the playing field in Europe. Their view is that other countries have underperformed, like Italy, Spain, Portugal, France, that they only have themselves to blame. They failed. As Merkel never tried to point out during the Greek debt crisis of 2009-2017. To do their homework, The implication was that Germany had done its homework. The euro as a common currency was sold to Southern Europe, which had been less prosperous than the North for decades, as a path to lasting prosperity. By eliminating exchange rate risks and lowering interest rates, Southern Europe was to become more competitive. Nevertheless, after the initial economic boost that followed the euro's introduction, their hopes have faded. So countries with historically high inflation benefited from the lower interest rates. The cheaper financing had the unintended consequence of removing the pressure on governments to enact necessary economic reforms. Partly as a result, growth in Italy and other countries mentioned stagnated, although it's easy to portray it as their fault. As some German economists have done, the expectations were likely unrealistic from the start and beyond the scope of this brief overview. In Germany and the small surrounding countries that integrated into its industrial economy, as Netherlands in particular, the reverse was true. Caricatured as the sick man of Europe in the early 2000s, German economy took off following the introduction of a package of sweeping labor market reforms. Once plagued by the strength of the Deutsche Mark, Germany benefited from the euro's lower exchange rate, which made its goods more competitive abroad. That was particularly true within the Eurozone itself, accounting to about 40% of Germany's exports. For decades, exporters from Southern Europe could undercut their German competitions on price. No more for them in this case since entering the Eurozone. That would not be such a problem if Germans reciprocated by buying their neighbors' exports with equal enthusiasm. Nevertheless, Germans prefer to save both in the private and public sphere and to buy German, quote unquote. As a result, the country had and continues to have considerable trade surplus year in and year out. Instead of acting as the great equalizer, as the authors of the single currency promised, the euro has exacerbated Europe's economic divisions and arguably left some countries worse off than originally, as some of the statistics we have just seen. As an example of these loser states, counter to popular perception in Germany and other northern countries, Italy, for example, has kept the lid on the public expenditures, even running a small budgetary surplus, before interest payments, of course, year after year. However, without economic growth, the country's debt, a legacy of the government's overspending in the 80s and 90s, has remained high. Italy's history with the euro explains its population's growing frustration with the currency and more generally with the EU. Having relinquished a significant degree of sovereignty to join the Eurozone, Italy has little to show for it in the view of many Italians. The EU's slow response to Italy's struggle with the coronavirus in the early phase has fully exacerbated those tensions. Less than half the Italians say they consider themselves to be pro-European in a recent survey. Still, recent analysis reveals that Euroscepticism is more conjectural in Spain and Portugal, but more structural in Italy. Italy has the most significant debt burden of any country in the euro except Greece, whose debt now is over 200% of GDP. By comparison, Germany's debt totals less than 60% of its GDP in 2019, jumped to 70% in 2020, and should be around 71% this year. France is at 115%, Portugal 133%, Spain 120%, Italy 160%. Rome can continue to finance itself for now because the European Central Bank is buying its debt in the markets, keeping a lid on the interest it pays. However, that will not last forever. This week, Italian borrowing costs rose to the highest in over 8 months, leading to a sell-off across the Eurozone on concerns over Italy's reform path and the possibility that the ECB might slow the pace of its bond-buying stimulus in coming months. Investors are increasingly pricing the possibility that the economic recovery, fueled by a recently more rapid COVID-19 vaccine rollout, and slowly seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, could encourage the ECB to slow the pace of its pandemic emergency purchasing program bond program. Now, competing blueprints for structuring the recovery fund have been shuffling between Brussels and European capitals for some time since last year. Finally, with the Next Generation EU, a 750 billion euro temporary recovery instrument is being created and voted on throughout the EU states to help repair the coronavirus pandemic's immediate economic and social damage. The hope is that post-Europe will be greener, more digital, resilient, with a better fit for the current and forthcoming challenges. European countries could see this first money come this summer under the political agreement achieved. The fund will last for 6 years and is the product of an unprecedented agreement among EU leaders to collectively borrow money to fuel spending needed to overcome the economic impact of the coronavirus outbreak. I think it is a big chance for some change between the winner and loser states if reforms is addressed in the mentioned loser countries, but also within German thinking as well. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called the accord an important step towards financing the investments and reforms we need to support the economic recovery, laying foundation for stronger, more resilient Europe. Will this happen? I think only time will tell. Under the tentative agreement, we know the details. The rest of the funds will be directed to 4 pillars, which is reducing social territorial inequality, boosting economic cohesion, improving crisis preparedness, and investing in education. Very important. Meanwhile, national parliaments are in the process of ratifying the legal changes required for EU to raise the ceiling on what the bloc is allowed to spend. That must be done before the Commission could borrow the money on the markets to finance the fund. Nevertheless, there is a Corona bond part of this plan. The debate is a proxy for a more fundamental question, I will state. If Europe's weakest economies emerge from the pandemic even less competitive before they were going in, and burdened by even more debt, what is the case for them to remain members of the Eurozone? Conversely, can the Euro survive without them? Yes, this is a political question. Perhaps the most reliable guide is trying to gauge Germany's likely course is its past behavior. Throughout the Euro crisis, Berlin insisted that countries receive no more than was absolutely necessary and that they enact economic reform as a precondition for the aid. One reason is Germany is already spending some money, considerable money, and getting its own economy back in gear. By some estimates, Berlin measures to confront the crisis are equal to 7% of German GDP. As the economic crisis worsens, as it looks inevitable, the pressure on Merkel to do more will rise, making spending on the rest of Europe even more difficult. While many economists and center-left commentators have called for more solidarity with Italy and Spain, Merkel stayed mainly out of the view. We still have the September elections ahead of us in Germany when there might be additional change in the country's policy, as was the case with the influential US after the recent election where Trump was defeated. The situation remains dynamic. Still, recent polls suggest that Germans are more willing to accept this common debt issuance than was the case during the Greek crisis. Here is the chance for some enlightened solidarity to show the way. The other question German skeptics of such plans raise is what difference it would make. At best, bailing out Italy, Spain, and other loser states, as they are mentioned, would bring them back to the point where they were pre-crisis. However, that would not solve the underlying structural problems that have bedeviled the euro for years. Single currency would remain as exposed as ever. Most convincing argument for German action is that Italy or the other loser states are not Greece. That is, they are too big to fail. German industry is heavily engaged in most of these countries, as are German banks. Whether it wants to or not, Germany may have to save these countries to save its own economy. An instrument will be soon in hand with this fund. Going back to Italy's example, its massive debt is also the strongest argument for remaining in the Eurozone. Were it to leave and reintroduce the lira, it would find itself servicing its euro debt with much weaker currency, significantly increasing the size of its debt. Nonetheless, given Italy's experience in the German-dominated euro so far, Italians might be forgiven for thinking that leaving is their only option. In conclusion, I would like to say that the COVID-19 crisis has revived the economic policy debate underway in Europe, wiping out any hesitation in thinking small. This is a large amount of money. In just a few months, tools for joint management of the crisis have been created that could eventually evolve into a completely different organization of European macroeconomic policies throughout the Eurozone, and not only. Interdependence and the need for risk-sharing instruments are now highlighted in areas as health, public investment, ecological transformation, and management of asymmetric shocks. A big opportunity for the loser states and not only. While it is too early to say where this will lead, without genuine solidarity as Schuman's thought envisioned, there is reason to hope that in the next few years, Germany will contribute to reform rather than being a stubborn defender of the status quo. The COVID pandemic might just serve as a long-delayed wake-up call in resolving the seemingly unresolvable issue of differences. Thank you.
Mr. Jan Czarnecki, thank you very much indeed for your paper. I am very much indeed impressed with your very, detailed analytical statements in that expressing your opinion. And we are publishing that type of papers on the website of this Schuman debate on renewing the European Union. And I ask kindly all speakers to deliver such 1, 2, 3, or 5 pages papers, so much pages as you want, related to your today's speech. So you are not forced, you are just kindly asked. Because we are collecting this, papers, so that later on based on that, to publish a report, which we are going, to send to different national parliaments as well European Parliament. So I perceive your presentation, Mr. Jan Czarnecki, as a very concrete, very, I would say, constructive way of this analysis, which is based on the very strong and good arguments. So thank you very much indeed, and stay with us. We are going to continue our dialogue and our speech, our talk. And now I would appreciate for a short speech, Dr. Egidijus Vereikis, who is a politician from Lithuania. So, Dr. Vereikis, are you with us? I see you are online, right? Hello, do you hear me? Professor Dr. Vereikis, are you there? I see you online. So, okay, so it just, if this will take some time, so take time and get ready when I call you once again. So I would appreciate you express your opinion about these issues. And now, if I may ask the Professor David Reichert from Comenius University. Professor David Reichert is born in the US, and we would appreciate your opinion about this all issues. Probably not all issues, just address what you think is most important from your perspective and from the perspective of the person, expert, United States professor and the United States expert. So David, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, that's great.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I think the topic I have for our discussion is about unitary solidarity and peace within the European Union. What can the European Union do to come back to unity, solidarity, and peace? And so I'd like to say a few words about this topic. And what I was thinking is that when speaking about unity, solidarity, and peace in the context of the European Union, I think one has to be very clear as to what one means by it. If we are speaking about a united, cooperative front that has prevented major war in Europe since the Second World War, then I think we can all agree that the European project has been a great success, with, of course, the exception of the conflict in former Yugoslavia. But if by unity, solidarity, and peace we mean inter-community political relations, then we might need to use an old phrase from the American doomed space capsule Apollo 13, Houston, we have a problem. What I'd like to do today in my little talk is discuss some of this problematic features of this idea of a unity, solidarity, and peace. So what can we say? Well, today, really, I mean, in the last few years, what we've seen is a really terrible fighting within the European Union, political infighting over, well, the financial crisis in Greece, to the refugee crisis, especially surrounding Italy for a time, and then the so-called rule of law crisis with Poland and Hungary. And so the EU, in my perspective, today is far from the harmonious community of nations dreamed of by Robert Schuman. But what is the genesis of this disharmony? Now, at our last debate, I remember we had a very good speaker who claimed that the genesis of the disharmony was the Treaty on European Union, as that was the first treaty that really made the European project a political project. However, in my view, the European project was political from the very beginning. Of course, it began with economic union involving coal and steel, but to think that one can deal with such critical post-war materials such as coal and steel and merging production and trade policies and not have it be political is rather delusional, as I think Jean Monnet says in his makes clear in his memoirs. No, the European project was political from the very beginning. So it is not, in my view, it's not politics per se that is the problem, but rather the gradual addition of competency areas, one over the other, or even worse, presumed competency areas by Brussels, which have magnified the politics and therefore increased the probability of political conflict. Now, in 2016, with the vote on Brexit, it was clear that the British had had enough of this. The organization that they had spent 1 decade trying to get into, the European Community, was no longer about politics of competition and trade, but the politics of a lot of other things, not particularly things in British national interests. And we can discuss these things at length, what those were, but I would like to single out today one thing in particular, and a relatively new area of political discord, and one that has aroused anger in a number of member states, and the so-called rule of law situation. Now, in July of 2020, as many of you know, the European Parliament came to a proposal that would link any COVID recovery funds or money included in the so-called recovery package, a package of funding for the member states, 750 billion euro package, recovery package, and they would link this to respect for European Union values, including the rule of law. Now, this means that a number of member states, or that any member state that violates EU values, whatever that means, may have their recovery fund payments reduced or suspended, as well as future payments from the EU budget. Now, as we all know, 2 member states in particular, Poland and Hungary, were singled out by the European Union over this so-called rule of law issue. And they found themselves in the very problematic situation of possibly losing recovery package funding. The problem is that the EU has never set out precisely what values such as rule of law actually mean, the definition of it, or the basis for the criticism of some countries over others in a rule of law context. Now, really, the only thing we have to go on here, as far as I know, is Article 2 on the Treaty on European Union. And Article 2 on the Treaty of European Union merely says the Union is founded on the basis of values of respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, rule of law, and the respect for human rights. Doesn't say a whole lot about what that actually means. But both Poland and Hungary said they would veto any recovery rescue package if the rule of law criteria was invoked. And so, you know, one really has to think, one really has to wonder how much further will this values debate in the EU go, and where is it all heading? Where is it going to lead? Certainly not, in my view, in the direction of unity, solidarity, and peace, at least politically speaking. Now, in the context of Brexit, it should be remembered that when questioned about why they voted for Brexit, those who voted for it, the British citizens said they did not have a problem with the economic and trade issues of the EU, but rather, and I quote, the ability to control our own laws was highlighted by those who voted for Brexit. Now, this opinion was echoed in the 1980s by Margaret Thatcher, who actually supported, you know, it's interesting, Margaret Thatcher supported the common market and she supported the Single European Act, but she warned, and again I quote, against a European superstate exercising new dominance from Brussels. Well, in the end, one might ask, what's wrong with having the EU become a roving moral political authority, regularly checking the values and the rule of law and of member states and penalizing those states that fall short? And the answer, of course, is that such an ungrounded moral authority that can do good can also do much wrong. The EU, through the Commissioner for Values, would become like an Ayatollah, dispensing justice in terms of benefits to member states deemed to be upholding the rule of law, whatever that means, while denying benefits to those perceived in violation of what the rule of law means. And in fact, we actually see that the debate has little to do with the rule of law when we really look closely at it. If by rule of law we mean, and here's the classic definition of rule of law by political scientists, rule of law means that every person in a country is under the law, including people who are lawmakers, law enforcement officials, and also judges. So that's the classic definition. So in my view, what we're talking really about here are not changes in the rule of law by Poland and Hungary and other countries, but actually changes in some institutional structures of a few democratic governments. But to tell you the truth, it's not even clear that the EU criticism of Poland and Hungary is about that.
Yes, go ahead, David.
Yes, you know, I'm not even sure if the EU's criticism of Poland and Hungary is about those institutional changes. The outrage over the so-called structural governmental changes in Poland and Hungary, and by the way, we can debate those changes. You know, I'm completely open, and I think we should all be open to debating those realities, those new realities. But the problem is that, in my view, a lot of what we're hearing from Brussels about the rule of law is simply a cover by the European Union to criticize rather conservative EU member states, also including Latvia, Lithuania, Malta, the country where I reside, Slovakia, countries that disagree with the extension of civil rights into such politically correct areas as abortion, LGBT issues, marriage, transgender issues, gender, and refugee issues. I mean, seriously believe that if an EU member state would make similar changes to its governing structure, favoring center-left politics, that there would be the same level of criticism coming from Brussels. I'm not so sure about it. Well, why am I sensitive to this problem? As an American, I have witnessed the same phenomena occurring in the United States over the last 20, 30 years, namely the tyranny of Washington over the member states of the United States of America, particularly in the so-called values areas, with the national government in Washington imposing progressive values on the states, regardless of the separate cultures and traditions of the peoples of those states. So in conclusion, from where I view it, the future looks problematic for European Union's unity, solidarity, and peace if the vague and undefined concepts of values and rule of law are to be the new determining factors of member state worthiness. For example, will member states that do not recognize the supposed right to abortion of unborn children, will those states be punished in the future? What about member states that do not recognize domestic homosexual partnerships or same-sex marriage? Will they be punished in this values direction? So I believe that the European Union is at a real crossroads today in terms of unity, solidarity, and peace. If the EU continues to go down this path, I think it will open up a new Pandora's box of problems, guaranteed to cause disunity, instability, lack of peaceful political relations among member states. And that, my fellow participants, is something very far from Robert Schuman's Community of Nations vision. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor David Reichert. It's very important, a point of view. You as an American, you as somebody who is not, I would say, representing any country in Europe. And I think that your opinion about that is perceived very objective because of that you do not have any you do not take any point of view of a particular country. So I really impressed by your, speech. And especially, I just noticed that what you said, the many things in European Union, by Brussels or by many probably other leaders, are complicated. As Professor Herman said, our environment is complex. So guys, do not complicate this more. Do not, add this, artificial issues. Something which is, as Professor David Reichert said, creating, more and more chaos. The people, basically, as Robert Schuman said, human being will not accept this chaos. And the European Union can go into the bankruptcy. Because the human being are not the machines. So, as is that statement, the European problem cannot be solved by drastic process of economic and political reorganization, which would create a federal unity, the United States of Europe. Europe owes its unique character to the fact that it is and has always been a society of nations, each intensely conscious of its own social personality and its own political institutions and laws, but all united by a common spiritual tradition, a common intellectual culture, and a common moral values. It's only by the recovery of these common traditions and values and in the strengthening of them, that Europe can be saved. And I think, very much indeed, this statement, I cited the Robert Schuman, refers very much indeed to that what Professor Reichert said. So thank you very much, and stay with us, Professor. Now we got a second round, and I just let me give for each speakers for that second round 5 minutes. So let's start with Mr. Yves Gergen. Excuse me for my pronunciation.
So it's Jernigan.
Jernigan.
Yes.
Jernigan. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Go ahead. The floor is yours. 5 minutes.
Thank you.
You can basically refer to that, questions, so issues touched by previous speakers. So decide how you would like, to shape your next 5 minute speech. So go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So I would express some remarks after all these very interesting speeches. So I'm convicted that protecting the diversity of the nation is a priority and even a duty. Cultures, language, social habits, religious practice, etc. must absolutely be strongly protected in each state of EU. But in the other hand, I'm committed that Europe should move towards a greater subsidiary way. But it's very clear for many citizens that EU shouldn't do more, but better. That's to say that you should collectively take action only when member states' power is insufficient. So when it comes to the political and geopolitical context, since the end of the Cold War, new global menaces have arisen. So, for example, the climate change, the increasing migration from Middle East and Africa towards Europe, that it's very effective in the south of Europe, the Islamist terrorism, the new commercial and military power of China, so etc., etc. And Robert Schuman cannot be aware of these new menaces. And I think all these threats cannot be tackled by one nation, one state alone. I think only European response would be effective. We can observe a real change of mind about Europe, even from Eurosceptic political parties. For example, in France, Mrs. Le Pen, who is president of the National Rally, the Front National, no longer makes leaving the Eurozone a priority. Of course, I express a political vision, but according to many polls and surveys, it's the opinion of an increasingly number of European citizens. Opinions of jurists and economists and civil servants are very important, but in a democratic union, you must take into account the public opinion and the will of voters. That's my final remark. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. You touched a very important point. I mean, the question, frequently there is a use the word European skeptic. In fact, I don't like this word. I am not arguing with you, Mr., because it doesn't, reflect real sense. I would say that being responsible for the European Union as a community, we should be Europe realistic. If we have a dream which is not a real, okay? And if we go into the not real direction, if we just go to the wrong direction and we do not just adjust this direction, we are heading to the bankruptcy. So we should be Europe realistic. This is going then to strengthen the shaping good quality of the European Union. If we just assume that European Union doesn't need to be changed, we are facing a big problem. As Schuman said, we face the bankruptcy. So this is our responsibility to talk about the real problems, like in a family. If you just do not start to develop the dialogue and you do not, touch the real problems, you are going to divorce. You are going to divorce because you don't feel the reality. It's not that you divorce by purpose. You just divorce because you are not controlling the situation. You are not able to control, to just manage. You are, if you do not see reality, you are not able to be responsible. And if you are not responsible, you are not to be able a good manager. This is the consequence of this logic approach. So as Schuman said, unity, solidarity, and peace. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Reichert. You just, shed the light into concrete issues of that statement, the logic implication, unity, solidarity, and peace. If you are if you want to reach this solidarity, you need to create a unity. Without unity, this logic implication says, if you do not have unity, the solidarity is not going to happen. Then, if you do not have the solidarity, so the implication says, if solidarity exists, you approach the peace. So what happens if you do not have the solidarity from the, this logic analysis of that implication, the logic you remember from the math, right? Mathematics. If the previous factor, solidarity, is negative, it means 0. The next one, the peace, is not able to exist. So there is not a free space in the life. If the peace doesn't exist, so this is going to be replaced by the war. So this is a consequence of that. We are used to live, many years in the peace. As Professor Reichert said, of course, this is a fruit. This is a success. But think about that, to not lose that success. If you do not, basically, take care about the sequence, unity, solidarity, you are not able to keep the peace for long. Many people is so-called the leaders in the Brussels, many people, politicians, they dream, they think, the peace is forever in European Union. No, it is not true. So just come back to the earth. Do not stay for long in the heaven. Of course, after the death, if you believe, you go to the God. So that's, I wish everybody goes to the heaven, to the God, of course, everybody, with not, exceptions. Yeah, so now I would appreciate for 5 minutes, Professor Peter Herman. So floor is yours, Professor.
Thank you. I appreciate many problems that have been mentioned. The superpower Germany, if you want to keep it in this nutshell, the bureaucratic system in Brussels. But I'm not sure if we are, if we should not be more hesitant to name what are the causes of it. I don't see it so much in the European Union as such, but as an imbalance, not between European Union and different nation states and the imbalance between nation states, but in the imbalance of the institutional system. We have the only democratically legitimized institution, that is the European Parliament, which doesn't have much power. And then we have political bodies that are not properly balanced in whatever their power is. There is no backing from the nation state. There is no balance between them. Actually, there is an imbalance between Council, Parliament, and the executive, the European Commission. So we have to address this, I think, more, and we have to focus on the problems and the challenges we face today. This is digitization. This is an industrial system that doesn't have any justification as such anymore to produce without any purpose. We have to shift to a trade orientation instead of producing, I mean now producing quality of the social quality, the quality of societies. So we have to be careful, I think, with this. And this means, of course, I agree, we have to change the direction, as you interpreted my first intervention. But even there, I would say we have to interpret, we have to change the direction according to the conditions as they exist now. And we have huge advantages. For instance, taking digitization as such, this is an advantage, of course, a challenge of not being controlled by political bodies, but by private bodies like Microsoft, like Zuckerberg, Facebook, and like. So we have to repoliticization of the European Union, and there I say of the European Union, because we have the European Union and we have to shape it in terms of the benefits we can get from this. To say Germany profited more than others, I think it is not correct as such. It profited by maintaining its strong economic role and by maintaining what had been the advantage before. I lived many years in Ireland, and Ireland was the celebrated child, being successful, having all the successes one wants. Then I got a professorship in Hungary. And when I started this, actually my first public lecture had been, please tell us, what did you do in Ireland to be so good? And this was exactly relating this question. Please tell us how you allowed stronger economies in the European Union to exploit the country. Because this was what happened with Ireland, and this was what happened with Hungary and with Poland as well. You have now in Poland Dell that exploited for many years Ireland. So I think we have to be careful what the actual reason, what the actual cause of this strong role of the German economy, as well the French economy, and for a while the British economy had been. So in short, changing the direction means changing, I think, the organization of the European Union in terms of a politicization and a balance between the different institutions to make not to democratize Europe by getting a stronger demos, which is, of course, a very important point, but by democratizing the institutions, not according to economic strength, but we have to think about a different way there. Saying as such, the institutional system is problematic, so we have to step back from this. I think this is a little bit throwing out the baby with the bathing water. I leave it there, although I should go on for a couple of hours to really get the differentiated needs and challenges in a better light than we have it now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Yes, I think we, and probably myself, misexpress a little bit. I mean, speaking about the, who explored whom. So what I used winners and losers, and I tried, at least myself, to highlight that winners and losers, in fact, at the very end, brought to the position that the entire European Union lost in the economy. So that's, I mean, a report I just delivered, which is not my report. This is written by a very good quality think tank in Germany. So this report, and I mean the talk about the big imbalance in the economies is rather going towards the, as you exactly, Professor, said, about the asking the questions, what are the reasons? So if we assume that this big imbalance, let's just do not, I mean, interpret that, you know, Germans are exploring somebody, okay? Just leave that, you know, thinking. But just that big imbalance is basically dangerous for the European Union economy. So we are right. Where are the reasons, okay? And what are the sources of that imbalance? Because my thesis, my statement is, if we go ahead with that big imbalance, we are going to be in bad shoes as an entire, I mean, European Union economy. As you know very well, the European economy is suffering on the competition. It became less and less competitive against the entire world. A very important factor of that is the population. So if you look into, for instance, India, the GDP of India is bigger than United Kingdom. And if you face that European Union is just losing in population, and we face a very big problem with the population in the long future. So any depopulation ideologies are enemies to our identity, I mean, to our economy. Okay, so this is the, security. So how we can, anticipate the security of Europe as a community of European nations. If the depopulation will go ahead in that speed, okay, so we don't need to dream about, you know, the energy transformation, or, you know, we will not be anymore in Europe as a Europeans, right? There will come somebody else to live here. So this is a very, important question about what are the, reasons. And you touch, Professor, a great point. And I am very, surprised why the conference on the future of Europe doesn't touch the point of the depopulation. I do not see on the agenda. We don't need to talk in that, in that area about, you know, from the perspective of the religion. just talk about from the perspective of the economy, the population. So, and if you promote, if we promote any the population ideologies, then it is against us, against the economy of Europe, against, so the logic, it seems to be that, different people, different leaders, I'm not blaming anybody, I'm not judging, just we're losing the logic, So let's come back and think logically, That's, otherwise we are just killing ourselves, right? So thank you very much, Professor, that you basically touched that point that, of course, we have different problems, but what are the reasons? And you are right, once we, catch up and we identify and diagnose properly the reasons, we are able, to come out to find the solutions. That really very, impressive indication. So thank you very much indeed. And now I would appreciate 5 minutes for Dr. Excellency Eva Salkiewicz-Munerlin. Floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. So what I would like to say is only that the conversation and the discussion is very fruitful, and I am very glad that all of us presented some point which maybe the other one did not pay attention to, because of course it's very difficult to know all. As I said before, I am a lawyer, I am not economist. So in order to prepare my presentation, I had to read many documents, which before, of course, I was not involved in, but I did it with a great pleasure, and with my great interest, I found out that, of course, there are some common points between, of course, political science, as we know, economy, international law, social science. And in this perspective, I think, of course, I will send my presentation in writings, and I hope that we can find some conclusions which will help to expand maybe or extend the agenda. Is it possible eventually to put some new items on the agenda or not of the future conference?
Of course, that would be great, Excellency. I challenge you, so I am waiting for your suggestions. That's a great idea.
Because you see, this is, as I understood, the plan, the items which will be discussed during this conference, it is like a draft, isn't it? And if we have to take into consideration the people's voice, as we say, of course, we are representing some intellectuals or some groups, which, of course, academic and so on. But I think it would be interesting to put on the agenda some items which are not mentioned, as you said, about the depopulation, or what I mentioned before, or some other interlocutor said. And I think it would be very interesting in this perspective. So if you allow me, when I send my few pages, 2 or 3 maybe maximum, what I have said today, maybe by the end, each of us could put some kind of the recommendation, isn't it? Recommendations that eventually could be added as the addendum to the draft program of the conference, or in some other way, because otherwise, I mean, in order to realize what we are talking about, we should just mention what we think is missing, because otherwise it will be just talk, but we should put it in practice, that eventually it is heard by the people at the EU. And as you mentioned many times, when you presented some of the tables, it was not about attacking anyone or the country like Germany, other countries, of course we are happy that everybody has a good progress, etc. We are not jealous, but of course it has to be on certain equity basis, because otherwise, as you know, it is not good for the EU. Because, for example, there are some things I don't like, but of course you say advantages and disadvantages. And I don't speak about the financial motives, because for me it's not important, or in private life or even in between states, but about the future. So I think that we should continue with this project, which is still continuing, and we hope it will be continuing in the future. But in order to repair, to reform, we must take into consideration what we think is missing. Because, for example, in Poland, when we were admitted as a new member of the EU, you know, it was a great enthusiasm and everything. Of course, we are in this exclusive club of Europe and so on. It was, I think, in certain moment over 80% that they were in favor. Actually, they are only 50%. And I am afraid that after this judgment of the tribunal in Luxembourg, it would be even less, because really, this is, in my opinion, this is the subject for another discussion, of course, legal discussion. But I think that really the position of the tribunal is a little bit equivoque. Why? Because, like in the international law, for example, the International Court of Justice, nothing, if there is a judgment, which cannot be executed, or if the countries say, no, I will not do it because it's not for my interest. And of course, what you will do with such a country? You will start the war? Of course not. So this is absolutely inefficacious. And that's why I think if we wish well to the EU and our countries at the same time, we should reform this institution. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. So yes, I appreciate you deliver to me not only the papers but as well the recommendations. We as an institution organizing this event, we have a right to deliver to the Brussels, to our parliaments as well, you know, this input. And I think what is missing in that conference of European Future Europe is not only some, items you highlighted today, you indicated, but as well as missing a methodology of this process. Methodology. So I just, get aware about more today after the speech of Professor Herman. I don't know, Professor, if you agree on that, but I see there is a lack of the methodology. That this is engagement of a huge number of people in that conference. And if there is many parties, and if you do not have a very good methodology, like for instance, not bringing to a more important position in national parliament. So if you do not have a methodology like we know in any, research we do, in any project, then you are going not to obtain a right conclusions. So, cause and outcomes. So as you said, what are the reasons, right? And if we identify the reasons, then we are able, to propose the solutions for the adjustment of the direction, not getting step back, but adjustment of this direction. So I would really appreciate if, because for instance, many, sentences expressed by as well Professor Reichert, they are indicating into the methodology, indicating on the, simplifying that picture, something is, we know from our practical activity that if you create a complicated body, complicated vehicle, you are not going to get the good results. So simplify that. Of course, not compromise with equality, but simplify that to obtain a real success in that process. Yes. So as the next for 5 minutes, I just ask Professor Pablo de la Fuente, please.
Well, I listen all the speakers, and well, I will talk about two things. First of all, one of them talk about the situation of divorce in the European Union. Yes, perhaps we are in this problematic situation, but a marriage is composed by two people, and the European Union has 27 partners. It's very complicated. That's true. I think that we must change the model to a kind of community or league of nations. Because, well, I talked about this question in the last debate, but I don't want to. One of sample of that, I have the sensation, I have the feeling that the European Union is something nowadays like right on a dinosaur. In a moment the dinosaur go forward, but change the direction or stop the dinosaur is very complicated. No, for example, in the case that our French colleague talked, Mr. Yves Guernigon, and he talked in one of the proposals of the Front National in France was leave the euro. Is something. Do you listen?
Yes, Professor. We just wanted to see you because
Yeah.
I mean to listen to you and to see you. This is then the very a complete complete perception. Go ahead.
Only said that for me. All the process of reform of the idea of Europe is very complicated because the dinosaur is going forward, and I think that go backwards is very difficult. If something so easy like the Brexit was finally so complicated, I don't want to imagine how France, the other partner of the BCA, of the European Bank, can leave the euro. I think it's a scenario that I cannot to imagine. But this is the contrast between talk like members of the academia or manage and rule and have a situation day per day. I think it's difficult. When you talk, for example, Professor, about the question of the fraction Schuman in the parliament, you are in the dynamic of the dinosaur. Also, the problem. You try to break the dinosaur, to stop the dinosaur, but the question is, you are riding the dinosaur. Thank you very much for your kind invitation.
Thank you very much, Professor. As I said, you usually very, creating very interesting and original statements. So now just I ask Mr. Jan Czarniecki for just 5 minutes, please.
I would gladly. Yes, very informative, all the different points of view, people, different backgrounds. In terms of backgrounds, I'm an architect by profession and would like to take the point of view of a builder, a master builder, as Robert Schuman was, with his vision, let's say a Beaux-Arts vision, how this wonderful, beautiful new building is to look and on what kind of foundation it stands. His foundation was very clear, given the post-World War II reality and the history that he came from. So, and hoping that this sort of universal vision will continue for I don't know how long he envisioned it for, perhaps forever, but as we know, the dinosaur is moving forward, and that forever doesn't last nearly as long as we all would like to, and there is not always a happy end. But from a Polish perspective, I would like to add that there's a Polish saying that your point of view depends on the place from which you are sitting. And we here in Poland, as let's say, relatively newcomer to the Schuman vision, had certain expectations, certainly given the terrible baggage we had of communism, World War II, which at the time, this seemed like a safe haven for us to go to. Because in our situation, as you know, Professor, it seems that the geography is the destiny. Our geography is certainly much worse, I think, than Portugal's, which historically, maybe is, I'm incorrect, but has a big influence. We are between two large superpowers, and we need to, and we have survived successfully for 1,000 years. And we find an attractive vehicle for us to continue in our development as a state within the context of the European Union. The problem is education. I believe we were so enthused by the concept that we will be accepted to this exclusive club, let's call it. Of course, it's not, but alternative to the Warsaw bloc, the communist bloc we were in, and saw only a rosy picture. I think the media of today, the way it presents issues more on the ideological side and not so much on the political side, is making a mess in people's head where it is. That's why it is so important what Ms. Eva Sarkiewicz-Munerlin said, that the subsidiarity, this national parliamentary participation in the activity, a voice of the people, actual voice of the people, be an element that would also educate the average Kowalski or Schmidt as to what it's all about. And I think that would be a good start for us to find more common ground in the community of nations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jan Czarnecki. That's important. I mean, a point. But you know, we survive just 1,000 years between these big powers, superpowers. So this is a proof that we will survive next 1,000 years. Okay, thank you very much indeed. And Dr. Egidius Vareitis, are you with us, Doctor? I see you online, but you know, probably you didn't switch off your connection. So if you're with us, I would appreciate you just raise your voice. In meantime, I would appreciate, 5 minutes for Professor David Reichert, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much once again. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about, maybe follow up on some of the comments I heard and some of the things that I said as well. I just was interested to read in October of 2019, Viktor Orban, he traveled to France, as I understand it, and he had a meeting with President Macron in France about the situation in Hungary, in his country, and those structural changes we talked about. And I'm not sure about the outcome of that meeting exactly, if it had any effect on Mr. Orban, but what I thought was interesting is almost exactly a year later, after that sort of rule of law a highlight in with the Macron and Orban meeting, about a year later in France, there were huge waves of protest across France, if you remember, for a police bill. There was a new police law, a proposal that would grant substantially enhanced rights to the police. And there was then criticism of France for rule of law. So I guess the reason I'm mentioning that is, again, there's nothing wrong with that, except that, first of all, if there's going to be a values debate in Europe, and it's going to be a critical component of the European Union, then those values have to be carefully defined, and they have to be agreed upon by all the member states. And that is something that, to my knowledge, is not yet accomplished. In other words, what I would propose is actually abolishing the Commissioner for Values. I mean, there's a nice lady who's heading up this commission, and this is no criticism of her, but actually the commission position for values should be suspended until Article 7 of the Treaty on European Union is clarified. What are we talking about when we talk about the rule of law? What are we talking about when we talk about civil rights in the EU? What are we talking about when we talk about civil liberties or human rights? So all of that needs to be very carefully defined and agreed upon by all 27 member states. Otherwise, it's just a kind of a vacuous thing where you can pour any interpretation in there. So I didn't want to, I don't want anyone to get the impression that I was necessarily defending the structural changes in Poland or Hungary or any other country, including France. My point was that if you're going to have such a debate and such a criteria of evaluation of member states, then it has to be agreed upon, has to be clearly defined and agreed. Again, as an American, we had an amendment to the United States Constitution, very famous one, after the Civil War in the 19th century, and it's the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment was originally intended to give civil rights to the newly freed slaves, civil rights to blacks. Well, since that time, it has been used for almost everything, to incorporate rights for this and that and every other cause. And actually, if you read the 14th Amendment, it's very short and it's very abstract. I would almost compare it a little bit to the Article 7 of the Treaty on European Union. So my fellow participants, I would just, that would be my recommendation. If the European Union is intent on going down this values path as a criteria for the worthiness of member states, not only in coming into new countries coming into the Union or existing members to remain in the Union, then I think that these considerations really need to be followed up. So thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much, Professor. Yes, it seems to be that we touched some very, most important points. We have, it seems to be very good diagnose and more or less about, understanding of the sources of many reasons, of many problems. This today, a debate, as you notice, a few weeks or a few days ago, is dedicated very much indeed to that, issues in which are engaged, Germany and France. And we invited German and the French ambassador many weeks ago. I think even it was 3 months ago to that debate, indicating that somebody asked us why we dedicate the debate for Macron. Why you in Poland are interested in the Macron view of future of Europe? So because we respect views of France, views of Germany, views of Denmark. We invited Danish ambassador, and he was present. We invited Spanish ambassador, he was present. Spanish ambassador even invited me for a coffee. I spent with him a time. We invited the Latvian ambassador, he was present. But we invited France ambassador and the German ambassador, or just saying, if you don't have a time, just send the deputies. The answer was, we don't have a time. So we say, and this is in internet. So we have around, I think, 50 or 60,000 participants. So Excellency Eva Salkiewicz-Munerlin asked, touch the point, we are here intellectuals, professors. Dear Excellency, we now represent, to some certain extent, the views of 60 to 100,000 people. So this is the conference about the future of Europe we organize in that way, that we are, now in the debate, which is not only between us, a few people here around. So we are going, to bring conclusions from the huge number of people. So I hope that the German ambassador and the French ambassador will respect us as we respect you. So once again, we didn't organize the debate, related to important, areas, which is basically expressed by the Germany or France. So we hope that you join this debate. We still have many debates up to the December. So, and in this point, I like to express my very great, very great respect to all of you speakers today. So to Mr. Jernien, Professor Peter Herman, Excellency Eva Salkiewicz-Munerlin, Professor Pablo de la Fuente, Mr. Jan Czarnecki, Professor David Reichert. Because the quality of that debate, your very, a gentle approach, the quality, the level of the discussion, this impressed me very much indeed. And the dialogue, what is the most important, the dialogue. So once again, ambassadors of Germany and France, I am not claiming you, but you need to create a platform for the dialogue. This is your responsibility. This is your responsibility. If you do not engage into dialogue, do not think that European Union will be developing in the right direction. I think that statement I expressed now was very important, and I was not planning to do that, but basically your dear speakers, your quality, your gentle, approach, your preparation to that, a discussion. Is that what we need in Europe, right? Is that what we need? And this is building the relationship. So as Schuman said, the most important is not the institutions, economy, the creating the relationship. If we are, far away, discussing in the offices, we do not create the relationship. So now we do that. And this is the way the Schuman highlighted, that very much indeed. So for really very end, I give for each of you, the speakers, 2 minutes for just final conclusions. Anything what you want to say, it doesn't need to be just in the relation to the questions I put, okay? But just anything it's on your heart. So first, Mr. Jernian, please.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, that's great.
Okay.
That's great.
Thank you. So thank you for your invitation, Mr. Krysiak. It was a pleasure for me to participate in this debate. I completely agree on the idea of creating a dialogue platform. That's the more there is dialogue, the more there is exchange between European citizens, which have maybe different view on the European question. And I keep in mind this idea. Thank you. So, in conclusion, I would say that during our election campaigns across Europe, we were listening to the citizens. They expressed concern about Europe. For example, excessive bureaucracy, the lack of democracy, but there is no total rejection of the European construction. I think citizens express a large desire to change the direction of Europe to get more peace, solidarity, and protection. So I hope the Conference of the Future of Europe will be a success and bring answers to European citizens' concerns. However, citizens get high expectations towards Europe, and I hope that citizens will widely participate to this conference. So thank you again, Mr. Krysiak. Thanks to the organizers, to the speaker, to the public, and it was a pleasure for me to participate. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Jernian. So sometime I will manage, to pronounce your. I promise next time I will try to be excellent in the pronunciation. So this is my duty for our next meeting, okay?
Okay, so, thank you.
Thank you. So next, Professor Peter Herman, just final 2 minutes, please, anything you want to express, Professor.
Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity. There's one point I think we have to consider, and this is a point we all have to consider in Europe. We are not only in Europe, we are talking about global strategy. We are talking about the South America. We are talking about China, where I'm currently working. And this is important to see this perspective. It is not and cannot be, in my opinion, about a dominance of Europe. We can talk about values, but this is an exchange of values, and we should not be, from a European perspective, I would say, so arrogant to say we have the correct values and we want to export them. This is an old model which never worked, which always have been leading to conflicts, and I think mutual respect within Europe and on a global level is so important. This is currently in the war, in the aggressivity of Israel shown, denying the rights of others. And I think this is of crucial importance. If we want to understand Europe, we can only understand it in terms of a global responsibility, and this means respect to all others and knowing about what we are talking when we are talking about others, because my experience, having lived in different countries, is we are always talking about others, but we are rarely talking with others. And this is a major problem we have to address institutionally and in terms of exchange, and then, of course, rejecting the dominance of anybody, including rejecting the dominance of Europe. Thank you.
Professor Herman, thank you very much indeed. This is a great point, you raise. We didn't basically plan to touch that, but I think this shows us that this perspective is giving us more distance to that what is happening in our family. So just an example, if you just stay with your wife all the year in the house at home, and you do not meet any friends, then you lose the distance, right? Once you go out, you see the world in different colors. And this is a serious, and the one, I think, the professor, the Schuman was talking about the plan for Africa. But saying that, Professor Herman, and as well to all of you, dear speakers, I would like to invite you for a next debate, for the debate which is going to be, I think, in 2 or 3 months. This is the debate in that sequence about this issue, what touched the Professor Herman, which is, the issues, outside the Europe and the responsibility of Europe for that. Okay, so please, have in mind, and I will send you the information about that, and I would appreciate you be, at that debate in that context. Last 2 minutes, Excellency. Ewa Salkiewicz-Munerlin.
Thank you. I would like to thank, first of all, the organizers, and it's not only by political correctness that everybody by the end thanks the organizers, but really, thanks to you, we had the possibility to present our points of view. Thank you very much, and also to all participants, because I agree with you, it was a very high level of the discussion, and I'm sure it will be continued. Just 2 small remarks out of our context. First of all, about the Professor de la Fuente, that from the beginning we agree about almost everything about. I would like to say about some funny things I had about the euro. Like he said, I agree with, of course, this Spanish economist who said, what is euro? Euro, it's 2 marks, because I remember I was in Greece in 2001, and as you know, they introduced after the 1st of January 2002, and I didn't know about it, and I pushed the machine, from where you take the money, I pushed, I thought it was in euro, and I pushed 200 euro, and I got so many drachma that it was over me. I didn't know really what to do with it. The second thing about, of course, Professor de la Fuente also, when he said about the people without the preparation in the government. So I think we have much in common with Poland too, because I don't want to mention the names. It's the past already. But we had from right, left, center, we had these things. I don't want to mention the name of one very young undersecretary of, I think, Minister of Defense, who had no idea what he's talking about. So this is really very bad. And I would give the example, for example, of the United States, that in this case, maybe this Biden is not so good idea, but the people by, per force, they have no experience at the beginning. I'm talking about politicians or educators, professors, because, for example, it is not the Miss Universe, isn't it? When who is wearing what, has 20 years or less is better. But here you must have an experience, and the experience you get only with the time. You cannot get it just in 1 second like that. So, and the second thing, how our small group is developing. For example, Professor Yves Jernigan, which I would not know how to pronounce his name, if not that many, many years ago when I was in Geneva, I made some translation of the legal Polish text to one man whose name was Jernigan, and I always said the wrong name. I even ask him now if it's his cousin or whoever it is, because he worked at the Bureau International de Travail, when at that time ILO I was doing some translation for him. So the world is very small. So, and for example, Mr. Jan Czarniecki, that I didn't know you before, but now I know you. It's very great pleasure for me. So thank you very much, first of all, the organizers, and of course to all participants as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor De La Fuente. 2 minutes.
or one only. Well, only I'm not.
We don't see you.
Yes, I have a problem with the camera.
So you
tomorrow
didn't see my
another
best friend,
camera. Well,
my dog, who appeared with me because he said it's too long and he came to me.
Well, Excellency, one time I not agree with you. I must to defend the prestige and the honor of Spain. We have the worst politicians in Europe with a lot of difference.
Oh, you are not the only one. Don't worry.
Well, in this case, well, thank you everybody. Thank you to the Schuman Foundation. And the speakers for their interesting expositions. And well, in this case, see you tomorrow.
Yes.
With a new camera. Yes.
Yes. Oh, a new camera.
Yes, I just explained, you know, the Professor De La Fuente is referring tomorrow from 10 a.m., from 10 in the morning to 12, just 2 hours, we have a debate on Schuman fraction in the European Parliament. So everybody who would like to join, you are invited. So all of the speakers. So I just send you the link today. If you have time and you will be able to join with us. So Mr. Czarnecki and all other speakers, I would appreciate you be there tomorrow. So now 2 minutes. Yes, Mr. Jan Czarniecki, please. Switch on your microphone, please.
I guess my thank yous won't be as flowery and rich as was the ambassadors, but I was very pleased to be able to participate in this meeting. It was very short notice, actually, but very, very positive group. I just wondering what Professor De La Fuente is going to feed that dinosaur, because I don't want him to run too fast, you know. It will knock down the architecture that I'm trying to build with my. But yes, going back to the architectural concept, you know, architects start in the beginning, but architects modify and need sometimes to modify their structures. However, you don't want the building to look like some Gargamel, you know, but it has to still have some kind of solid basis. Now, I agree here with Professor, Herman, that there is a need, there is a necessity to perhaps change the direction, I would say, but let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater, as they say, and think this through very clearly, keeping in mind always the basics, because the basic concept, we have drifted from much too far. But I think with the positive approach and the right people, there is a chance to reset the course and sail forward in the future. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Jan Czarniecki. And of course, you are invited to the next debates, I will inform you. And I think this is very good conclusion you did. We can't remove the basic principles, the basics. Like, you know, in the physics, Einstein developed, you know, let's say, a kind of extension on physics, and it doesn't stay contradictory to the Newton. Without Newton, we would not have an Einstein. So the Schuman principles, and this is what we are talking all about. If you remove these fundamentals, okay, then your building, your house is going to go down. So of course you can reshape this building, but don't remove the fundaments. The Professor Herman, you are right, saying here, all of you said about that we have a more complex, new issues, new problems, right? But these new problems, I mean, it's like we create a new building. Jan Czarnecki, as an architect, you know that on the same fundaments we can build a new building. Sure. Like Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, right? A great, you know, a great building, great, I mean, invention, right? But built on some principles, on some basics, on some fundamentals, okay? So I think this is a great conclusion of you, I mean, which can be added to the many others expressed today. And final 2 minutes, Professor David Reichert, please.
Hello. Yes, thank you very much. And also I'd like to express my thanks for invitation today to participate in this very interesting discussion. And I'd just like maybe to give a comment about Ambassador Eva's, Vatican Ambassador Eva's comment about experience. And I think it's really important experience, and we hope that we will have leaders of great experience, but also judgment, because I remember during the presidential debate on the Democratic Party in the United States, when Hillary Clinton was talking about all of the experience that she had, Mrs. Clinton, in politics up to that point. And she was talking about her experience and about this experience. And one of her opponents, Bernard Sanders, he said, well, experience is okay and it's important in its place, but there's another quality, it's called judgment, good judgment. So I think there has to be some meeting between experience and judgment in our political leaders. And I hope we'll get that. Just to conclude, you know, one of the things that I think would be very helpful is if a political party or a political movement or a political group would emerge in Parliament that would be Eurosceptic, but not Eurosceptic in a sense of destructive sense, or a sense of dissolving the EU, but rather enhancing it by getting it back to Robert Schuman's vision of a community of nations. So I think that would be a very nice to have such a political movement in Parliament that would be going back to Schuman's original vision. So thank you. I appreciate all your comments, and I learned quite a lot today from all of you. So thanks once again.
Thank you.
Professor David Reichert, thank you very much for that interesting conclusion. And I think you probably get a little bit taste, you know, how, I mean, many people like as well the Institute of Schuman Thought, which we, I mean, promote to create a pan-European Schuman movement and to create the Schuman fraction. The Schuman fraction, Schuman movement is not going to be destructive. It's going to, I mean, take care about our grandmother, Europe. Our basically mother is our nation, is our, for instance, Poland, for us, for Germans, Germany, right? Like, you know, Schuman expressed on that, to our mind, European policy is certainly not in contradiction with the patriotic ideal. It encourages to the particular nature and characteristics of each of its states and fosters the sound love for one's own country, which is a love that does not go in detriment of other countries. It wants to attain a unity in the fullness of its diversity. So Schuman, in other words, is saying, do not be afraid about to love your mother. If you don't love your mother, you will be not able to love your girlfriend or your wife. So in other words, if you don't love your motherland, you will be not able to love the other nations. So this is a very great, great expression. So the love is never contradictory to anybody. So if you love, it excludes the hate. If you say that you hate some other nations and you say you love your country, it doesn't true. You are you are a liar. So love to your nation doesn't exclude the love to others, and opposite. You cannot say you love the Europe and hate your own country. So this is a great, I think, Schuman's expression. In fact, you know, he wrote that expressions at the very end of his life, 2 years before he passed over. And Professor David Reichert, thank you for that conclusion, because yes, we even should be more determined to build a Schuman fraction, to build the pan-European Schuman movement, to which I invited all people of a goodwill, for whom, you know, the grandmother, our Europe, is of the highest responsibility. That's how Schuman was basically thinking about that. I feel, Professor David, I feel you would like to respond some one sentence. Yes, it's or not?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that's a wonderful thought, and it's something that is very hopeful, I think. And so this project that you're leading here is a very, very hopeful project, and I look forward to our future meetings in this direction.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much again to all of great speakers. I really respect all of you, and I hope you will join to our other debates as well. Be so kind to send us the papers and recommendations. We'll put that together. And thank you very much for all, you know, people, participants in internet. This event was organized by Institute of Schumann Thought, the Forum, Economic Forum, and the Ordo Iuris, and many medias, you know, cooperating just for broadcasting of that debate. And see you next time. So our debate is on the 19th of June, 19th of June, exactly at the same time on Saturday from 4 p.m. up to 8 p.m. So thank you very much again, all the dear speakers, and see you next time. Be in touch. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. See you.